the Constitutional Roundtable. I'm your host, Andrew, the citizen, and as usual, we have Douglas V. Gibbs, Mr. Constitution, and Warhamster. How are y'all doing tonight?
Doing good. What's happening, Andrew?
Not much. All right.
Yeah, busy day as usual. I was in Irvine this morning at an event, but got a great chance to meet Michael Francis. I don't know if you know the name.
I don't.
He's the guy who publicly left the mafia, and lived.
Which mob?
He's Italian mafia out of New York.
Oh, okay. All right.
Yeah,
so
he was like the son of like a mafia boss, and he decided having a family and a wife and his newfound faith was more important, and there was a price on his head and the whole bit, and here he is still alive, and everybody was predicting he'd be dead quick because you don't leave the mafia like that.
Well, obviously the Lord had his hand on him, so.
I got his book, got a picture with him, talked to him. And Warhamster, you may be happy to hear that I'm going to ask him to speak at our next year event.
Interesting.
Yeah, but anyway. Well, if anybody knows about the opportunities of America on the right side and the wrong side, that's the guy.
Yeah. So how have you been, Warhamster?
I'm good. Busy week of work, but I got a lot of time to do a lot of homework. Spent a lot of time looking into Lincoln's protectionist tariff policies and a bunch of Hamiltonian stuff, and got a chance to hang out with Doug yesterday, and we had some good conversations. So it's been a good week.
Anything you'd like to share that could inspire maybe some constitutional thinking tonight?
Well, I don't know.
Thinking going on.
I don't know. I asked Doug an interesting question yesterday, and I don't know if he's had time to research it. But the question I asked him was, does it not say in the Constitution that it's up to Congress to pick the day of elections? And if that's the case, how is it legal to have early mail-in voting and after election day voting as well?
Interesting. Well, Doug,
in Article 2, Section 1, it says that about the presidential election, but picking the day is up to the states when it comes to the other elections.
So if we're just talking about presidential, early elections should not be allowed.
Correct.
What about votes coming in after the day?
Or voting? No, votes coming in because they haven't counted them yet. That's different.
Okay.
Yeah, it's funny. There's you'd ask that, Andrew. There's after November 2020, I did a bunch of reading, and there's all kinds of human rights organizations all over the world that have kind of come together and put together a compendium of what a free and fair election should look like. And if there were like 12 little things, boxes you could check off, the United States follows about 2 of the 12.
Wait a minute.
At this point.
Wait a minute. So you're telling me that that there's ways to have a safe and fair election?
Yeah. Apparently, it's been going on for a couple hundred years, and the best one was France. What was it? A couple months ago, France had their national election, and they got about the same, 40 million people there, and they were able to get the whole thing counted in one day, and nobody questioned the results.
Well, you got to remember, Joe Biden is the one that actually had the most safest and fair election. So, if there's ever an example in history, that's, I guess, definitely theirs.
Nothing's perfect, but I personally like the purple thumb idea. But
the purple thumb. What's the purple thumb?
That's what they did in Iraq. After you voted, you had to cast your vote, and you had to give a thumbprint, and then also it was an indelible ink, so you couldn't vote again.
Oh, okay, all right. So here's a question off of Warhamster's thing. There is, what was the first, what was the original day of elections in the United States? I know it was not November 3rd.
And that's what they started.
It's always been around that time.
It's always been. The way they put it in is like this. It's like the first Tuesday of November or something like that, or like the first Tuesday after the first Monday, something like that. So you can't actually have it like on November 1st, but it'll never be after like November 9th or 10th.
Yeah, it's always been early November. What has bounced around is Inauguration Day when Congress takes, office, things like that.
Yeah, that brings up a really fun little story that popped up today. Chuck Schumer just sent the entire Senate home to campaign earlier than expected. They're debating no more bills. Nothing will be passed until after the elections. They get back on like November 14th, which probably makes Doug happy. He'd like to have them gone, for much longer periods of time.
Oh yeah,
but
I like the once per year idea, but that's beside the point.
You get no argument from me on that one. But apparently they're a little worried about these senates, so they want to send their senators home to campaign.
Are you saying that they're even getting worried that they might not be able to win even with their fraud?
I didn't use the F word. I'm not the one who's killing this channel.
Oh yeah, I forgot. That's right, YouTube. But
it's the F word.
Yeah, yeah, that's right. We got to say the F word. Well, if we lose this show, it's all my fault. I'll take the blame.
Didn't you hear Andrew? Didn't you hear Andrew earlier? It's the most safe and secure election either. It's so safe and secure. You're not even allowed to ask about it.
No, it's ever more present these days of how we're a republic in name only. I mean, seriously. I mean, we have an oligarchy. I think we're basically already there. They just haven't. They're just kind of waiting for them to be able to finally go, oh, great, you're done with this? All right.
And the truth is, though, the oligarchs are not sure which one is actually in charge, and so they're still fighting for position.
Well, that probably goes back to with what Warhamster has been talking about as far as with the Rothschilds and all the families and stuff like that. I mean, are any of the politicians really, I guess, are any of them not puppets? I mean, let's be honest. I mean, it literally feels like I'm watching theater. I mean, there is that term, political theater, right? I mean, there's a lot of show going on. So I did the, but it is what it is. So Warhamster, what was some of the other stuff that you have been researching? You said you had some constitutional stuff and also some.
I spent a bit of time earlier in the week on Senator McCarthy. And really fascinating guy. And I'll circle this one back to the Rothschilds at the end. But McCarthy was a really interesting character. He actually dropped out of high school to work on his farming business. Then he went back, like when he was like 16, and completed 4 years of high school in a matter of 9 months. The guy was apparently just a brilliant mind.
He's from Kentucky, right?
No, I think it's Minnesota or Wisconsin. It's one of the two. It's one of those ones. He became like one of the youngest judge and then the youngest senator in state history. He's 38 years old. He became a senator. Interesting part is when he was a judge, World War II breaks out, and he was exempt from the draft, so he just went ahead and volunteered for the Marines and served with honor. Gets back out and becomes a senator. And
that's honorable. That's an honorable thing. What happened?
He's a very interesting guy. I'm gonna be doing more homework on him. When it came to this the communist quote unquote witch hunts, most of that homework had been done already in the 40s, and Truman gave all these people the State Department a pass. The State Department was riddled with communists. McCarthy came along and gave a speech in 1950, and then he became the poster child to be attacked by the media in Hollywood.
Now let's stop right there. Now, and I know you're going to go into this, but we hear often when it comes to communism in the system, McCarthy was right, McCarthy was right, McCarthy was right. And if I remember from my reading, McCarthy got the label, the blame for the un-American activity stuff, but it wasn't really him, was it?
There's other people that had done the homework before. I mean, we had people that came clean. They would give the FBI lists of hundreds of communist infiltrators, and the Soviets even bragged about how the United States was the most infiltrated Western government. But we know there were hundreds of people in our government that were communist sympathizers. Alger Hiss being one of the major names.
Right.
And these people never really got prosecuted. A couple people got executed, just like a husband and wife, and I forget their names.
Well, they were caught selling secrets or something like that, weren't they?
Yeah. They actually were caught red-handed. But there was no political will to actually punish these people, and they had the lists. I mean, the FBI knew who they were, and it's just it's rather disappointing. I mean, how much? Because it's right after that time period when you started seeing the culture of the United States go to hell in a handbasket.
Yeah, and then when from a constitutional standpoint, you have to ask your question: where's that line between freedom of speech, and treason. I mean, you're supposed to be able to be free to believe what you want in this country, to support the systems you want. But at what point, because now in the case of the couple, yeah, they got caught red-handed. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about just people who, hey, they're a member of the Communist Party. They believe it's a better idea. But, they haven't done anything necessarily, activities that would, go against us when it comes to our enemies. But they're just believing that. At what point do we have the okay as a system to say, you can't do that? I mean, because, freedom of speech, right?
Well, they're trying to do that right now.
Yeah.
You can't question the election, and that's not okay. You need to be able to have free speech. This is just, it's the old wound from the Alien and Sedition Act of 1798. You just can't have that. You have to be able to criticize government, but that's different than plotting against it. And I think what it becomes...
And in the 1798 one, they blamed it on the Tories. They're saying, well, we've got these people who want to deliver us back to the British Empire. That was their excuse. Of course, that wasn't it. I mean, Congressman Lyon, that's not what he was doing. But when he was arrested, he was just complaining about the Adams administration in a written form. But
every single person they arrested or went after in the Alien and Sedition Act was not a Tory. They were all anti-federalists. That was the target. It was very obvious.
Anti-federalist or pro-Jefferson.
Yeah, fair enough. Which is it?
Let me say, I'll get started. Everybody watching, I posted this in the comments, but feel free to post questions that you have for Doug as far as anything to do with the Constitution in the comments, so that way we can ask them to Doug, and then Doug can answer those questions for you. Anyway, go ahead.
Oh, I was going to tell you, my favorite person that got caught up in the roundup, the few people that did get prosecuted, was a guy who worked for the Treasury Department by the name of, I think it was Michael Rothschild. Yeah, that happened. It was like 1952. We actually busted a Rothschild for being a Soviet spy.
I'm curious now. I got to know about this. The moment you said the name, I'm like, okay, this has got to be explained.
I don't have the detail yet. I gotta go do the digging.
What do you know, or is that all you know?
You've basically, that's it. That's as far as I got. I didn't
man, this is like a teaser for another episode or something.
Yeah, if there's anything juicy, I'll just have to talk about it next Thursday when you're out of town.
Well, you know what? I might just have my phone with me and just tie into it anyway. You'll just have to, look, instead of this wonderful background, you'll have to look at something ugly like a bunch of trees and stuff. But
terrible.
Forest.
Yeah, Andrew. Doug's out of town next week for our normal in-person Constitution class. I'm going to lead the class, and okay. I think I'm going to do it. I think I'm going to be doing a deep expose on some hidden secrets about the CIA. So I think I'm going to have.
You sure you don't want to play around with stuff about Hamilton?
I could do Hamilton as well. I've got a lot of my mind on Hamilton. I've just got done reading 2 books, so.
I'll tell you this, though, with my schedule, unfortunately, I've actually been missing all the Constitution classes, though, because I don't get off work till 6. So.
Well, this is the in person when we do on Thursday.
Thursday. Yeah.
Thursday night.
Tuesday's not going to happen because Ron and I both have something. I'm out of town, and Ron's got stuff with his mom. So between the two of us, we decided, man, we just won't do Tuesdays. But
yep. Andrew, I'll send you the Zoom link for Thursday night. That'll be 9 p.m. your time.
Okay.
Yeah, and in fact, I would encourage everybody watching, listening, if you want to see me doing an actual class where I talk to the audience, I've got my board going and all that, Thursday night, 6 p.m. Pacific and 9 p.m. Eastern is a Zoom, 1776foreverfree.com if you want to sign up.
And a week does not go by where Doug doesn't make me go up and talk in front of the class too. So.
What happens now? See, here's what happens. See, most people, when they raise their hand, it's because they have a question. But, Brady, being the teacher's pet, he raises his hand to, give comments, to make me look better. And that's the reason, I'm sure. But anyway, my attitude is, if you're going to ask a question, I can repeat the question for the camera, the Zoom people. But if you're going to start giving comments, the audience on the Zoom can't hear you. So come on, get up in front of it so that Zoom can hear you as well. And I've got usually in my classes, I have one person that loves to give lots of comments. In that particular class, I have two, sometimes three, definitely two. War Hamster and a guy named Todd. And between the two of them, I'm always like, come on, get in front of the camera. But what's funny about that, and I'm going to kind of, get into a little bit of background here. So when War Hamster first started coming to class, for his own reasons, he was not fond getting in front of the camera and showing, he would rather hold up a sign, that had a War Hamster on it in front of his face if he could get away with it. So, and sign language or something. But I kept telling him, no, hey, if you're going to say something, there's the War Hamster. So I kept saying, if you're going to say something, you've got to get in front of the camera. And so I think I've created a monster, because now he loves doing video and getting in front of the camera. Well, I don't know if he loves it, but he acts like he loves it and does it quite a bit. So I kind of feel like I may have been, partly involved in creating a star, but we'll see how the stardom goes in the future. But that's the story. I sent out an email for this show at the last second because my day has been so crazy busy that and yes, I got the Dr. Pepper, Chris. Thank you. It was such a crazy day. I didn't even have a chance to even think about today until the last second. And then War Hamster sent me a text saying, "Hey man, did you let everybody know so we can have an audience?"
Yeah. Well, we have between 5 and 6 in there now, and I actually have 27 subscribers. So we're getting
That's growing nicely.
Yeah.
Well, I think as word gets out and people say, hey, what they're doing here is kind of interesting. Questions. We're talking Constitution. But I think we do need to get a little bit more serious today. We have kind of chatted around a little bit, but if a war is declared, does that automatically postpone an election, Carolyn? No. I mean, I guess it could if they if the powers that be wanted to play unlawful games, but from a legal stance, no.
No, in fact, we've had plenty of elections during wars, including the Civil War.
Yeah, FDR's had. How many
Yep.
he had during wartime?
Let's see. You got elected in 1932, 36, 40, and 44. So 2 of those were during wartime. Well, actually, no. We went to war in 1941, not 1940. So one time he was during war.
Well, the argument was that because no president prior to Franklin Delano Roosevelt had been elected more than 2 terms, and only twice had a president tried a 3rd term. Grant and Teddy Roosevelt. Teddy Roosevelt, when he ran to split the vote against between Taft and Wilson, and split the vote to Taft so that Wilson could get in. But a lot that was brought up. Hey, kind of, it was almost a how dare you want to serve more terms than the father of the country, George Washington kind of thing. Why are you breaking tradition? And the argument was, well, there's a war going on. There's a Great Depression going on. It'd be foolish to change leadership at this juncture, was kind of the argument.
Hey, Doug, why don't you tell the story about why George Washington almost didn't run the second time? I love this story. Yeah, it's a good one.
Well, and it's funny because a lot of people don't realize the importance of all Americans throughout history. We have a class out there that wants to convince you that our whole history is just some white male patriarchy, and those are the only ones that were important. That's the only ones that had any say, and it's the only ones that were influential, and it's all flawed because of it. That's kind of the story we get. And George Washington, he had been a surveyor. He had been a soldier, French and Indian War, Revolutionary War as general. And then after serving his first term as president, first 4 years, I mean, the man was tired. He was old. He was sick. He had some health issues. He had been serving his government now, or his country, should I say, not government, but his country, for 36 years, and he was ready to hang it up. And so he sent letters to his three most trusted friends to let them know, I'm tired. I don't want to serve a second term. I know everybody wants me to. The word is out that I'm going to be reelected with ease, but I really don't want to serve a second term. And those three most trusted friends was James Madison, Thomas Jefferson, and Elizabeth Powell. You'll notice that Alexander Hamilton, even though he was a scribe during the war, wasn't one of those three. I wonder if there was maybe a little bit of a falling out. Just wondering. But anyway, and so Elizabeth Powell was one that responded with the urging not to abandon a second term. And in fact, she was the one that convinced him to serve that second term. In her letter, she explained that the enemies of the Constitution, she didn't mean the nationalists, she meant the anti-federalists who believed we should go back to the Articles of Confederation. They were scared to death of this Constitution, that they would see him not serving a second term as an abandonment of the Constitution, an abandonment of this new government. And that to really get the Constitution on solid ground, to give this government the foundation it needs, he needed to serve a second term because, George, you're the foundation of the system.
Yeah, it's Washington. Agreed. Yeah, Washington history is interesting. He was not the history books and the political class at the time presented George Washington as this larger than life figure. He was a flawed man in any ways, but he was a great man. He wasn't a perfect general, but he got the job done eventually.
Yeah, well, fortunately, he knew how to learn from his mistakes. But anyway, go ahead.
Well, no, and I've read some pretty harsh criticisms of him that some of which appear to be correct. But the point being, we were glorifying our history somewhat dishonestly to present this image of a much more successful early Union than it actually was. It was a little more chaotic than that. Mm-hmm. Than that. They let it on in the history books. Hey, there's a fun question in the chat. Chris asks, I've never understood how FDR was elected in the first place. He was elected overwhelmingly simply because we were in year 3 of the Great Depression. People were furious. The system was broken. They blamed it on the Republicans at the time.
Even though Hoover was a total progressive, unlike where the Republican Party was going after Coolidge. But
he promised a bunch of free stuff, and he delivered on a lot of it. I will say the one thing FDR did really well was the Securities Investment Act of 1933 and 34, which regulated Wall Street, was actually really well written and done. And part of the reason we're in the mess we are today economically is because we tore down some of those protections in the late 90s and early 2000s under Clinton and Bush.
That was a perfectly constitutional law as well, because if you go to Article 1, Section 8, when it comes to what the Congress has the authority regarding, what does it say? They have the power to, let me pull it up, coin money, regulate the value thereof, and the foreign coin, fix the standard weights measures, and provide punishment for counterfeiting the securities and current coin of the United States. And so that right there kind of gave them this authority to be involved with the securities and punish misuse of securities and so on and so forth. And it was taken as not just meaning governmental securities, but securities in general. That said, I would like to have it more clearly presented in the Constitution so that there's no question when it comes to that authority. But here's a question for you, Brady. So you appreciate the fact that the federal government has a uniform standard regarding securities, and Wall Street basically, and from a perspective as a constitutionalist and as a believer in limited government, does it bother you in any way, or do you see it as absolutely necessary?
You talking about the existence of the SEC in general?
Yeah, SEC and these rules and these laws, such as what Roosevelt.
No, those laws are absolutely necessary. I as a former reformed Wall Streeter myself, I can tell you that if you don't have very strict rules, it'll be chaos. It'll be worse than the '29 crash. The There are too many people out there that will take advantage, and there's still too many people out there just running scams and stuff like that. So the laws are absolutely necessary. Now, as a small government guy, what I would like to see is, with any of these regulatory agencies, as opposed for it to be a federal government type thing, I'd like to see the 50 states get together and have a coalition that does the regulatory. I'd like to have input from 50 states as opposed to a bunch of DC bureaucrats and politicians. But some regulation is necessary, especially when it comes to money and finance.
Well, the real danger, of course, is collusion, and there has to be some rules and regulations that disallows any collusion between government officials, government itself, and big corporations and the Wall Street investors and all of that. I think it's like I tell people all the time, because I get arguments about the big corporations and this and that. And I tell people, I don't mind big business. I don't even mind big corporations. I don't mind when they do really, really well. My problem is not these huge corporations. My problem is these huge corporations colluding with government or doing things to influence or affect government because they've got the money and power to do so.
Well, that's the cartel business model I'm always blabbering about, and the cartel exists for two reasons: to maximize their own benefit, and more importantly, to eliminate competition. And they use government regulation to do that. That is the problem. What say you, Andrew?
There's one particular party that loves to play along with it. Well, they both do, though, but one does more so than the other. But they actually both are guilty of it.
Unfortunately, I've been partially listening. I'm trying to find Doug some more questions, so I'm kind of letting you go back.
I've already got the war hamster leaving droppings all over the place. So I think we're in good shape at the moment. But
I'll just say that the corporation shouldn't be legal in the first place. The entire structure exists to get rid of transparency and to shelter people from misdeeds. I don't think limited liability is necessarily a good thing. If you are out there screwing over the public, I think you should be held accountable, both financially and legally. Corporation allows you to dodge that. That's why the people that created it are the richest, most powerful people in the world. These corporations in their current structure were created by these same law firms, Sullivan and Cromwell. They work for the same 50 oligarchical families that had just theoretically had their trusts busted by Teddy Roosevelt, but that never happened. So no, these corporations, these corporate structures, and it goes back to a very simple lesson. It is the concentration of power and wealth that is the root of all evil. You need to decentralize everything, whether it's government, politics, business. I'm all for state tariffs. I think if a California company trades in Arizona, there should be a small tariff to benefit the Arizona companies. Same thing, we should have international tariffs. I don't want centralized power. That's where we get into this mess. So,
yeah, that's interesting because you mentioned tariffs earlier and about Lincoln's overly protectionism tariffs. And you've heard me argue before with tariffs that I'm not against tariffs, but I'm not for over abusing them. Of course, everything comes down to moderation. And when it came to the Great Depression, one of the first arguments that a lot of historians, especially people who don't necessarily agree with me when it comes to the Constitution and politically, is they will blame Smoot-Hawley for the Great Depression rather than the Federal Reserve. And Smoot-Hawley being, big tariffs. And it definitely didn't help the situation, but it wasn't the cause. And so when you had a particular president, number 45, say, I'm going to, use tariffs against China, everybody's freaking out because, we've been convinced, we've been taught that, tariffs of any kind are bad, and that's protectionism and that's what caused the depression and blah, blah, blah. And everybody's heads start blowing up. And I tell people all the time, tariffs are a wonderful thing. It helps level the playing field. The problem is like with anything else. Too much tariffs, you've got a problem. Don't have them at all, you got a problem. You got to use them, but it's in moderation.
I'll take it a step further than that. And the real issue with the Hamilton and Lincoln tariffs were, and a lot of them since, is they weren't applied evenly. They were used to benefit the cronies. This is mercantilism. If you were like in Lincoln's days, they were basically, tariffs were created to benefit the North. There's a big issue from pretty much 1924 through 1957. South Carolina fought really hard to nullify the heck out of all these tariffs. All the manufacturing was in the North.
Crisis, matter of fact, arose out of that.
Exactly. And by the way, the free traders, the free marketers won for 30 years, and America grew like you wouldn't believe. That was the fastest period of growth in U.S. history as we were industrializing, as South Carolina led a bunch of southern states.
Well, we did two things. We were industrializing, But we also got rid of the Bank of the United States.
Yeah, that helped too. Andrew, you got your questions for Doug ready?
Yeah, I got a question for Doug. Not what I saw up here, because that.
Yeah, suddenly I feel like there's a target on my forehead or something. No, I'm kidding. Go ahead.
Here's a question I had. It kind of goes in line, which, Doug, you missed a real interesting ending to the show last week. But anyway, as far as, do you think it's in our best national interest to basically be selling, I don't want to say military secrets, but like we sell planes, like fighter jets and weapons to various countries, especially if I remember right, I believe they've been doing dealings with Iran. I mean, what are your thoughts on that, Doug? I mean, as far as, those things, like, should we be doing that? Should we not be doing that? Constitutionally, is that even, appropriate? Because we're essentially dealing with an enemy that we are currently dealing with as it is, Iran, China, and all that stuff. So,
well, before I get into the actual technical constitutionality, let me go over two things real quick. The first one is what I was just talking about: moderation. Where's the balance here? That's what I want to know. Where's the balance? What's best? Secondly, what comes to mind is while it's not technically in the Constitution, this is a principle that was very important to the founders, especially George Washington and John Adams, who mentioned it often. And in fact, George Washington mentioned this in his farewell speech at the end of his second term, and that's foreign entanglements. The question is, does it influence or affect us directly, American interests, by doing these things? If we are doing something that really isn't directly, I'm talking foreign aid or foreign affairs or anything, if it does not influence us directly and have a direct impact, we don't even need to be in the discussion.
Okay.
And that goes for giving aid, goes for giving, and especially when it comes to giving stuff to who basically hates us, like, a Muslim country or something like that. We shouldn't even be giving them anything. Now, that said, if we have a treaty with somebody, hey, we'll protect you because we're good friends and we're going to look out for you, then that's different. But this idea of, okay, we're gonna put some money into this pocket and that pocket, so that pocket can give to that pocket because that pocket's can give back to us, that's not what we need to be doing. And what's going on in the rest of the world is their business, not ours. I don't want to be an isolationist. I don't want to be a protectionist. But on the same token, I don't want to go the opposite extreme, and I feel that we have.
So I've read something. I'm going slowly through Carol Quigley's Tragedy and Hope. It's a 1,400-page book about the history of the world, and it's incredibly well researched. One of the things that Quigley Go ahead.
Is it a book?
Yeah, I do the audio book.
1,400 pages. Yeah, you better be doing the audio version. I mean, I didn't even read War and Peace, and I love to read. But anyway, go ahead.
Anyways, one of his observations is we go through cycles when it comes to military technology. You have a point in time where everybody, the common folk, have access to the same level of weapons as the government does. You have other time periods where the powerful have access to better weapons. And when it's more on an equal playing field, liberty seems to emerge, and you get citizen soldiers. When it's there's a disproportionate for the power, tyranny comes in. Best example, one of the great examples I can give you is in the medieval times, the most powerful military weapon was a mounted knight. The peasants couldn't get a horse or a lance, and therefore you had tyranny. You get forward to the days of the founding fathers of the Revolution. Everyone can get a musket. Everyone was on an equal playing field. Look at where we are today. Well, like Joe Biden says, you're going to need an F-35 to fight the government. That's why we have tyranny. That's why we have tyranny today. And what scares the heck out of me is, which may be leveling the playing field, but it does scare the heck out of me, is drone technology is very advanced. It scares the heck out of me.
Well, that goes to something I've said about the Second Amendment that sometimes shocks people. The purpose of the Second Amendment is so that the militia is capable of protecting us from federal tyranny. That's one of them anyway. And the militia being all of us. And a part of that is the fact that the militia is supposed to be involved when it comes to the relations of the federal government and the local governments, or between them. But the other one is, if necessary, to defend militarily, violently, whatever. And so I tell people, if that's the case, if that's true, then that means, according to the Second Amendment, that the people should have the same or greater than firepower than that of the government. And when I say that, people are kind of stunned.
Should the government have any firepower at all? Should all be state militias?
That definitely. Well, I think a big problem is that that the only branch of the military that should be continuous is the Navy. But it seems like we have a standing army at all times. It doesn't seem like we're really using that check and balance in the Constitution where, the Army and whoever has to, basically, hey, this is why we need to be active right now.
Well, the problem is, too, is that standing army has taken more forms than just Army.
Yeah.
I mean, the FBI, armed IRS agents, that's all a standing army.
Yeah. And constitutionally, we should not have an Air Force or a Space Force because they're not ratified in the Constitution.
Right. Or Air Force, Space Force, and
Marines.
Some might argue the Coast Guard. It kind of came together under the founders. It wasn't really a military service. It's kind of a weird. It's kind of a weird one. But
go ahead.
Well, when it's funny that you bring that up because I get in these conversations all the time. Should the federal government, our central system, have a Space Force and Air Force? Absolutely. I'm not saying that we don't want them. I'm saying that they're not constitutional. So let's go through the process to authorize
Bingo.
it.
Yeah. I will make.
Okay.
Yeah, I was going to say I'll make a strong argument. As a scuba diver, I like the Coast Guard quite a bit. Now, I didn't like them when they pointed machine guns at a catamaran, my buddy's catamaran, just because we decided we didn't want to stop for their whatever. Something they were doing, coming home from a concert at Humphreys by the Bay. They're pointing machine guns at little kids. It was driving me nuts. That's not what the Coast Guard's there for. But when the Coast Guard does the stuff they're supposed to be doing, create an amendment. Let's authorize it because the Coast Guard does a lot of great work.
Yeah, and it comes down, and the thing is, it comes down to authority. And I have a gentleman in my class in San Juan Capistrano will say, yeah, but Doug, sometimes the federal government needs to do something quickly. They don't have time to wait for the whole process and wait for the states to decide whether or not they're going to ratify it. And I said, well, you're right. Sometimes government wants to be efficient, and there is such thing as an efficient government. It's called a dictatorship. I know sometimes the process takes a while. If it's important enough, the process will go through what it has to go through in a well enough time. But there's a reason it's not easy to do something. There's a reason. There's a process. There's a reason it takes 2/3 to propose and 3/4 to ratify, because they didn't want it to be easy. They didn't want government to just willy-nilly add their own powers through an easy process. And, or as I like to say in class, be like Jean-Luc Picard on the USS Enterprise, make it so. That's not what government's supposed to do. There's a process. And there's a set of rules. It's called the Constitution of the United States. All I'm saying is, hey, if we're going to do this thing, let's follow the rules. Let's go through the processes. And there's a lot of things where I think the federal government should be able to do, and they are doing, but it's unconstitutional because they never got the authority. And I said, well, yeah, but Doug, they should be doing it. That doesn't negate the need for the process.
I kind of like the idea that Warhammer has as far as state militias. Like, that makes so much sense to me, is where we have no United States Army or any of that. Obviously we need the Navy, but where basically it's all right, in time of war, all right, let's get all the militias together and that's our army. And I think that makes the most sense to me, and that's the best way to, because
you need a unified force. There's going to be times where you need a unified force, but that's really for offshore usage.
Right.
The militia is really supposed to be for domestic usage. Now, that said, if we did have a massive attack against the United States, you'd appreciate the military being ready to roll domestically as well if it's a foreign invader. One of the blessings this country has had is we got two big old giant oceans on both sides of us. Yeah. We're not exactly the easiest to attack.
Yeah.
And
we're all
so our armed forces, for the most part, has been used overseas. But that we have been attacked, but it's been nothing like other countries' experience. But and so please don't misunderstand me. There's definitely a need for an army, a navy, a marine corps, an air force, a space force, and a coast guard. They're all necessary. It goes back to like corporations about, I don't mind corporations as long as they're not colluding with the government. I don't mind the military as long as they're not being used in a manner that is tyrannical.
Well, that's it's an interesting conversation. First of all, nobody in the world has ever considered invading the United States. We have the most well-armed civilian population in the history of mankind.
Uh-huh.
It would be, I mean, we see what happens in places like Afghanistan and Vietnam. Imagine someone, I know people love the movie Red Dawn, but that's not the reality. The American citizens, we just own too many guns and we know how to use them, and everyone knows that. So we've never been in danger of being invaded physically.
Well, it's kind of like a two-pronged thing. You're right, but also it's like when the Vikings were attacking the British Isles way back in, I think it was the 600s or something like that, or 800s, and the Vikings they would have to attack, but they could only lose so many men because they still had to row their boat back. They needed as many men to row back as they could keep, right? And so it was hard to attack because they had to cross that water. And of course, they solved the problem by just establishing settlements, but that's beside the point. And that's the same thing here. If they're going to attack us, they still got to, they're far from home, and so that's one of the factors. But I agree with Warhamster when it comes to our population being armed, and that's kind of the point of the Second Amendment. This militia is supposed to be armed, and this militia being all of us for a number of reasons: to protect the homeland from foreign threats, but also from domestic threats. That's kind of the idea. And it goes all the way back to the Saxons, the Anglo-Saxons who wound up invading England. And I used to think that the Saxons got their butts beat. It wasn't that they got their butts beat by the English. It was they kept getting their butts beat by the Vikings and the Danes and the Normans and people like that. But the Britannia, when the Saxons actually originally came, had been so used to the Romans defending and taking care of everything, they had become so soft they were easy targets. They were easy to take over. But the Saxons, get back to the point of the story, is the name Saxon comes from the short sword they carried, a sax. It was a confederation of peoples. In other words, Saxon wasn't a people, it was a confederation of peoples that worked together, had a certain system of government, and they all carried saxes. They believed that being armed was your liberty, and that idea has carried through all the way. I mean, that's kind of where our right to keep and bear arms began, was with the Saxons. But it's because that we live in a dangerous world, and if you've got threats from without and from within, the best way to fight against those threats, to stand against those threats, or make sure they aren't a problem in the first place, is to be armed to the teeth at the public level.
Hey, Doug, somebody messaged me earlier today that fantastic poem called "When the Saxons Began to Hate." Andrew, Have you heard this before? Have you heard this before, Andrew?
I have not.
Just the background. When Doug talks about the Saxon culture, that's really what, when I talk about what the American philosophy of life really is, we're people that believe in speaking softly and carrying a big stick, to steal a phrase. We're not a violent people, but don't mess with us because we will take care of business. That's kind of the American mentality. So this is a poem about the Saxons. It's where it came from. It's short. I'll just read it real quick because I think it's worth doing. It was not part of their blood. It came to them very late, with long arrears to make good, when the Saxons began to hate. They were not easily moved. They were icy, willing to wait, till every count should be proved, ere the Saxon began to hate. Their voices were even and low. Their eyes were level and straight. There was neither sign nor show when the Saxon began to hate. It was not preached to the crowd. It was not taught by the state. No man spoke about it aloud when the Saxon began to hate. It was not suddenly bred. It was not swiftly abate. Through the chilled years ahead, when time shall count from the date that the Saxons began to hate. I just think that's beautiful.
I had not heard that before, and that has so much history intertwined in what it's saying that it's almost chilling.
Yeah, goosebumps.
Yeah, very, very interesting. Very good.
I'll shoot you the full poem.
My chapter 2 of my book I'm working on U.S. history is pretty much all about the Saxons and how the Saxon system rose and the battles that happened and how it really became the basis of what became the English system and ultimately ours. Magna Carta, Declaration of Rights, and Glorious Revolution, all that. And so having just written that chapter not too long ago and doing some extra studies of Saxons, that poem really nailed it for me because I've got all this stuff fresh in my head. Now, that said, who was the author of that poem again?
Oh, give me a second. It's been a while. I should know it. I wanted to say Keating, but it's not going to be right. Not going to be right. I'll look it up right now.
All right. Well, Keating's one of my favorite poets, so that wouldn't surprise me, actually.
Hey, looking that up, I have a question for you.
It was Kipling.
Oh, Kipling, really? Oh, that's interesting. Real quick, a lot of people don't know this. My first published work was a poem. I've been a poet since I was like in high school, and I love reading poetry. I love writing it. Poetry is a big deal to me. So, and I do know a lot of these these historical poets, and but Kipling, I didn't. That makes sense now that you said it, but Kipling had not come to mind. But anyway, all right, go ahead.
Here's kind of two questions. They kind of go along a line with each other, but and forgive me because I actually don't know that, and if I missed it in the class, I do apologize. One, are executive orders constitutional? And two, what does the Constitution say about during time of crisis or war to basically centralize power? Let's give the president,
like emergency powers is what you're talking about.
Basically, essentially.
Okay. Two very good questions. The average person does not know the answer. I am actually asked these questions very often. When it comes to, so let's go to executive orders first, and we'll save emergency powers for a second. So executive orders have been in place since the very beginning. George Washington issued executive orders. Executive orders are typically, are supposed to be, I say typically because illegally often there's something else, but what they're supposed to typically be are either instructions down through the executive branch regarding the execution of a law or carrying out business of the executive branch, sometimes just organizing the executive branch, whatever it may be. Executive order typically is our instructions down through the executive branch, or a proclamation. Proclamations or instructions through the executive branch are the primary two, and we know because of Article 1, Section 1, that those executive orders cannot hold the power of law. So that's why I say proclamation. For example, one of Ronald Reagan's executive orders was the proclamation to have a National Day of Prayer. But it holds no power of law. You're not forced to pray on that day by law. You're not going to be arrested if you don't drop on your knees and pray on that day. It's a proclamation. Hey, this is something we ought to do. I proclaim that we ought to. This ought to be something that we should observe. But there's no force of law. Now, I mentioned Article 1, Section 1 a moment ago. So for those of you who have not spent a lot of time listening or you're not familiar with that, Article 1, Section 1 of the United States Constitution, it's the very first legally binding words of the U.S. Constitution, because the preamble is not legally binding. It is an introduction. And so Article 1, Section 1, the first legally binding words, the very opening line, the thing they thought was so important it needed to be right up front. All legislative powers herein granted shall be vested in a Congress. And it also establishes this idea of a separation of powers. All the legislative powers only belong to Congress. Legislative powers are the powers to create law, modify law, repeal law. The administrative part of law. The executive part of law, executing the law, can't happen until administratively, legislatively, law has been proposed, gone through the process of being approved, and then either signed by the president or or his veto has been overridden. Otherwise, it's not law. So, if all legislative powers belong to Congress, then that would mean that executive orders cannot have any legislative powers at all. So executive orders are constitutional as long as they're not being used as a legislative instrument or as an instrument to create, modify, or repeal law.
Hmm.
Does that make sense? You with me?
So essentially, it's been used for a while.
Oh, absolutely. In fact, I used to say over 45 times, and the count now is over 50 now that I've done the research. Over 50 times, President Obama modified Obamacare with executive orders. Usually it was just dates. Like a certain mandate was supposed to go effect on such and such date. Oh, we're going to have to push it back a year, so he just do an executive order. We modified the law. Can't do that. There needs to be a legislative amendment that goes through the whole process. Both houses approve it. President signs it, whenever it's legislative.
Well, the infuriating part about Obamacare is they kept trying to challenge it in the courts, mistakenly thinking that the Supreme Court would overturn it or had the power to do so or the desire to, when it should have just been nullified by the states.
Yeah.
Sorry, not happening.
Sued.
Yeah, but they should have just nullified and said no.
Right.
But,
I think so.
Of course,
okay, now for the other question: emergency powers.
Yep.
Emergency powers is a creation of the power structure. Emergency powers does not exist in the Constitution. There's nothing in the Constitution that says, you have all your rights except, here's an asterisk, unless there's a virus, or unless there's an emergency, or unless there's a war, or unless there's an F word on an election, or something like that. None of those exist. The Constitution is very carefully laid out. This idea of emergency, and someone says, yeah, but if there's an emergency, government's got to do something. No, actually.
Hey, speaking of which, I got to interrupt because we've been rude, Doug.
We've been rude?
Andrew. Yeah, Hurricane Ian just went flying over your house. How's everything going there in Florida?
Yeah, thanks for asking. I mean, it's fine.
Yeah, I'm rude, but at least Warhamster, saved the day. Go ahead, Andrew. I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, it's fine. We didn't really get much. My grandmother-in-law, though, she lost her carport, and fine. Her neighbor's not so lucky.
The car's still there.
Right.
Okay, the carport's gone. The car's still there.
Yeah, we're kind of we were not in the path at all. I mean, it kind of went by us. So, without giving too much pinpoint location to where I live, it went by us.
His address is no, I'm kidding.
Yeah. The tree were they were losing it. I thought the power lines were going to go down, but it was still far enough away though where it didn't really cause us any issues. So, the Lord really looked out for us in that. But yeah, no, we're fine. I appreciate you asking.
Now I have a friend in Tampa. I don't know the path of the storm. I've only been reading headlines. I have a friend in Tampa, actually, that I went to junior high and high school with. And he went to West Point and served in the Army and then became an IT guy and other stuff. And so we usually are in communication during the Army-Navy game. I was Navy, he was Army, and we give each other heck, once a year. But because I'm not aware, and there may be those who are watching this are not aware, what was the path of Ian for the most part? And I hear it's hitting South Carolina, right?
Yeah, so it made fall essentially in the Fort Myers area. So
West Coast.
Right. And then it went at almost a 45-degree angle and left through Merritt Island. So essentially that was the path. And then it went out to the ocean, became a Category 1. And then I think by the time it hit South Carolina, I think it maybe got downgraded to a tropical
storm. Okay.
Which is still not fun, but at least it wasn't almost a Category 5 that hit Fort Myers, which I think was the worst storm to hit that area, I think, in decades. But
yeah, they haven't been hit. They haven't been hit by a hurricane in a long time. Real fun one today. Kamala Harris announced that the FEMA aid is going to focus on making sure that money gets to underprivileged communities, and she wants to really make sure that there's equity.
Yeah, race
involved.
and gender basically is going to be the criteria, is ultimately what she said. from what I'm understanding. I don't have a link on it. The only reason why I know is because Jesse Waters on his show had mentioned it. That's because I was watching Jesse Waters earlier while I was working, and Jesse mentioned that. Otherwise, I wouldn't have known. But and if you got links, please put them out there. But all right, so underserved areas, because someone who isn't quote unquote underserved, their house probably didn't disappear under the torrent winds. Apparently, the hurricane is racist and only knew to attack the underprivileged areas.
Yeah, speaking of emergency powers, here in San Diego, as most people know, I'm a little bit politically active in the local scene. Our county board of supervisors just held a vote to declare a state of emergency over monkeypox. Yeah, we are now under another state of emergency because Biden canceled COVID, so now we have monkeypox emergency. So they still get to tell us what the heck they want to do or they think so.
Yeah, but monkeypox is different. So I mean, where do you wear the mask?
Ouch. So it's what I said on day one of monkeypox. I've got a very simple, the Brady vaccine for monkeypox is very simple. A, don't have sex with animals. B, don't have sex with people who have sex with animals. Problem solved.
I thought it was because I thought it all came out of like some gay festival in like Africa.
Well, yeah, it is definitely.
That's the theory.
Well, it's not a theory. That's pretty factual. This is definitely a gay disease, but that's where the super spreader events are. There was Pride Month. It emerged right after Pride Month. I mean, okay, do the math.
Oh man.
Yeah, I'll stay away from that one because it's not a constitutional thing. But yeah, it just makes me.
Well, it is a constitutional one, Doug. Does the government have any business deciding who can or can't be married in the first place? Therefore, this gay marriage stuff should never have been a conversation. We let them turn it into a political movement.
And to be honest with you, even though states could if they wanted to, I don't think states should be involved in marriage. But see, marriage certificates and marriage involvement by government, really there's two reasons for it. It's a way to tax marriage, and it's a way to control marriage. Because in the beginning, when marriage licenses and things like that began to emerge, where in the United States was that happening? Oh yeah, the South, right after the war between the states, to prevent blacks and whites from marrying. So why is government involved in marriage in the first place? It is not a government authority. It's not a government function. It is a cultural function. Now, I'm not fond of Harry and Steve getting together, but that is Harry and Steve's decision. I don't think it's a good idea, but I don't think there should be a law saying they can't. No more than there should be a law telling the pastor he has to marry him. It's none of government's business. And when it comes to cultural issues like marriage, it should be treated no different than our free market economy is treated. Let the churches make the decisions for themselves. They will reap the benefits or the consequences for their decisions when it comes to their congregations. And the culture will do what the culture does. It's not a government's business. If someone doesn't approve of such a thing, then let them voice that and hold their church services not allowing such a thing. But the government's not supposed to get involved to tell them one has to or that one can't. If another church wants to, let them. If Harry and Steve have an open bar, I'm there.
Tracy, I'm gonna have a good. Tracy, when we have
that's good.
We're gonna have a drink together, Tracy, at the victory party, and I'm looking forward to it. She's absolutely probably going to be a wild one.
Yeah, but anyway, so ultimately, government shouldn't even be involved in marriage in the first place. It's not. It's a cultural issue. It's none of their business.
And the problem is when they allowed it to become a political movement, we got what we have today.
Yeah.
So now, but it's worse than that.
It got fed basically.
Well, it's the same thing that happened with the civil rights laws and stuff like that. So what it is, it creates like whole cottage industries of grifters. You've got NGOs, nonprofits. You've got lawyers all getting rich because you violate this thing that people feel really strongly about because they're virtue signaling. But at the end of the day, they think they'll call people with with our beliefs. They call us Nazis. Well, no,
Yeah.
fascists want big government. We want small government. But at the end of the day, we're saying it's not the government's business. Period.
Right. Well,
We're not saying you can't do what you want to do.
And when I say what I say about keeping the government out of it, of course, usually the response I get from the other side, because I remember there was this gentleman, I called him Liberal Tom. That was the name I called him online. I had other names for him offline, but I won't go into that. Who used to comment regularly on my blog, and he was about as interesting as they get when it came to a lefty. And one time marriage did come up. I had written an article about it, and in the comments he says, well, gosh, Doug, you're married to a Mexican, so if it wasn't for the federal government getting involved in marriage, you would have not been able to marry your wife, because we would have never had interracial marriage. It would have never happened if the federal government hadn't gotten involved. And my first response is, really? You think something doesn't happen unless the federal government does it? That right there bothers me, first of all. Second of all, when it comes to the culture, there's going to be states that are going to go one way. There's going to be states that go the other way. What's going to happen? It either is not going to last in the state that's not allowing it, because people aren't going to like it and they're going to fight to change it, or the state's going to be left with people that only believe in that because everybody else is going to leave the state. And then the state will suffer the consequences. It goes back to what I said earlier about churches. Either you're going to reap the benefits or suffer the consequences. And then if something needs to be changed in the state or the church or whatever, then it'll happen. Let it happen naturally. So I am not fond of the government getting involved in these issues. Okay, it might have taken longer for culture to eventually get to the point where interracial marriage was allowed throughout the country. And maybe it would have never happened. Maybe it would have. We don't know what history would have been. But what I do know is I don't want government getting involved, especially the federal government, because not only because I don't want them to, but because they have no authority to. There's no authority. You want authority over marriage? Propose an amendment.
So I have, as wonderful as that topic is, I'm going to switch. I've been itching to get a couple questions in, and then
okay, yeah. So let's scratch that itch. Go ahead.
All right. That was wonderful. That was great. Hopefully that doesn't sound like I'm just all right, whatever. But
no, the reason why, let me interrupt you just for a second. The reason why, and Brady has observed this, a lot of people appreciate what I do is because they don't hear this kind of stuff.
Yeah.
It's the typical red versus blue or whatever. But does common sense, logic, and the law, which is the Constitution, the law of the land say? What are those three things? That's where I reside. I don't reside in red. I don't reside in blue. Now, I'll admit, red tends to like me more often, but I don't reside anywhere other than constitutionalism and my faith. That's where I reside, and nobody talks about this stuff the way I do. And I think that's one of the reasons why people appreciate it so much. But anyway, go ahead, sir.
No, let me just add another thought, and then we can let Andrew segue us into some other fun directions. Right versus left, red versus blue is nothing but a distraction to keep us from looking up to see who's actually pulling the puppet strings. Even if you win their game, the Republicans win in November, you're still playing their game, which means we lost. So until we get back to having a conversation of not right versus left, but liberty versus tyranny, and that basically means federalism, decentralize the government. That's the conversation you should be having every single time someone talks about right versus left. That's not the question. Republicans are a bit more tolerable than Democrats at this point in time when it comes to respecting the Constitution and individual rights. But if we want to really go back to freedom and liberty, stop playing their game and don't let them play the game.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Tracy says, well said. I agree. And that almost resided in the realm of Mark Levin, kind of his ideas. He's not perfect either, but that's kind of what he emphasizes. It's really liberty versus tyranny. That's what it really comes down to.
Yeah, I'm boycotting Levin right now because of his complete misunderstanding of the whole Ukraine situation. But let's not go there.
Yeah, there's a lot of them on that. Yeah, unfortunately.
Well, that'd be Fox News, and Fox News entirely has it. Well, I guess Tucker's gotten some of it right, but at the end of the day, even Bongino's wrong on this one. And I rarely disagree with Dan Bongino. But
all right, so I guess I was more apologizing for going completely far from that topic, but
No, let's do it. Bring on the 45-degree turn.
Go where you
so
want. It's your show. It's your show, brother.
well, this one's gonna be 180. Well, not one.
Turn the wheel hard on this one. Okay, go ahead.
So Warhamster
Seatbelt.
give a brief synopsis on this, and I'm gonna throw this, and he's gonna hopefully he'll be able to catch this thing I'm about to throw at him. But Operation Paperclip. Are you familiar with that, Doug?
I am, but this is definitely more Brady's realm.
My question is
And
that
actually, I'm familiar with it because of Warhamster. But that's beside the point. Go ahead.
is that constitutional? Should that have been allowed? Should things like that happen in this country?
Well, that's an interesting question. Do we have the need from a national security perspective of having an intelligence agency in the first place? And I think you can make the case that the CIA, with proper oversight, probably needs to exist or something like that. I think that's reasonable. And I think the executive branch should, I mean, that is part of the whole reason for creating the general government was to handle international affairs, and knowing what's going on in the world as an intelligence gathering agency. Yeah, I think that's okay. But to then lie to the world and bring thousands of Nazi scientists and higher ups into our country so they can skip the nerve.
That were on trial and they pulled them out. Anyway, go ahead.
Yeah.
What was it, like 16,000 of them or something like that?
So
we don't.
It was like this massive number.
Some hanged. I think we had at least 1,300 that we know about, and then Russia had some.
Well, here's the thing, and I want to add this real quick. When it comes to what government does and secrecy and all that, and them hiding some of these facts, Congress can determine if certain votes or certain things that are said can be not revealed for security purposes. However, when you read the Constitution, what I've noticed the Constitution is while it does give them the option in Article 1, I don't know why my camera keeps doing weird stuff like that, but I don't know why it gives the, I know that it gives Congress the option when it comes to certain information not to put it out there, but I noticed that when it comes to money spent, it doesn't give them that option. Every dollar spent, a reason must be given. It must be put out there for transparency in a journal, in a report for everybody to see. And so when it came to that situation, while there may have been certain aspects of it for national security they could have hidden, the overall picture and the fact that money was spent on it and the reason for that money to be spent should not have been. So from a constitutional sense, that would be the answer to that one.
Okay.
Yeah, I'd like to question the entire idea of government secrets. I would like to live in a 100% transparent society. Why have secrets? I mean, there's no reason for secrets. We shouldn't have
enemies that can utilize.
Well, yeah, but why do we have enemies? We have enemies because we have secrets, because we're doing stuff that needs to be kept secret, that we don't want the world to know we're doing. If you stop doing those things, you don't have enemies. Yeah, there's still bad people out there, but no one's going to mess with the United States. I
remember when they wrote the Constitution, we were basically a developing third world country, first of all. Second of all, there were a lot of people wanted to infiltrate what we're doing. And I still think that goes on. I do think certain secrets are necessary.
It's a fair argument, but I'm going to say we have way too many secrets, and that's a problem.
Just for those trying to keep score, Article 1, Section 5, third paragraph down. Each house shall keep a journal of its proceedings, and from time to time publish the same, excepting such parts as may in their judgment require secrecy.
Yeah, but also those people had secret honor. I mean, who these days does?
Well, yeah, technically, if there's something needs to be kept in secret, it's because it's in the best interest of national security. I hate using the word national, but that's the term we use, is national security, general security. Maybe I should say Warhamster.
I love it. Beautiful.
Yeah, but and so I do recognize there's going to be a need. We don't want the Chinese or the Russians or whatever to know. But the problem is, of course, you've got flawed human beings who seek power and wealth that are going to do more than what's necessary. That's our problem. And as I've like to say all the time, we have two problems. Number one, the problem with people is people, usually. And number two, who are the type of people that seek office? Well, holding office is a position of power. So what kind of person is going to seek that? People who want power. And so if good people who really don't care about power never runs for it, then what do you wind up with? A whole bunch of people who want power. What could go wrong?
Hold it over there. Political office shouldn't be a position of power. It should be a position of responsibility and service.
Well, yeah, but it is power.
The problem is we've allowed it to be a position of power. Yeah. It should be a position of service. You got to. And by the way,
well, the statesmen early on, that's kind of how they saw it. So I agree with you.
I'd like to get back to that. And by the way, I think I came up with a better term. How about mutual security? Because the whole purpose of creating the central government, the general government, was to provide for the mutual defense of the various colonies. So instead of national security, let's go mutual security. I think that's a better term. What do you guys think?
Or union security.
I still like general, but
I mean,
it's Hollywood Squares now. But anyway,
I'm with Warhamster though as far as secrets. I mean, we have treaties with countries that we don't even know what they're really for. I mean, they say it's for, the good of the.
Well, that goes back to my foreign entanglement thing too.
Yeah, I mean,
why do we have treaties with those countries?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like in order for people to hold political office, I feel like we need to have, instead of just being voted in, I feel like they're in having, general criteria like, you need to be, this year, this old or whatever. I think there needs to be like a test, like a common sense test before you could hold office or something.
A common sense test.
I mean.
Well, Andrew, there is. It's called the campaign trail, and they're supposed to actually be talking to the people, and the people judge whether they have the common sense to hold office or not. Yeah, that's already in place.
But we have so much money going in; it comes down to who has the best looking campaign.
Perhaps we should have an amendment that addresses that money, Doug.
Perhaps.
I've talked about that once or twice, haven't I?
Well, I mean, here's something that Doug will not be able to disagree with me on. And
be careful. And go ahead. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Tommy Lee Jones from Men in Black, but it's true. The individual is smart, but people as a whole are stupid.
Never underestimate the stupidity of people in large groups.
Yeah, I mean that isn't that the whole poison of democracy? I mean, have all the yes, the individual. You and I are smart. Yes, I'm sure there's some Democrats individually that are smart, but as a whole, it's a nightmare.
I don't care if someone's smart. I don't care if they're intelligent. I want them to be informed, and then have the sense to take that information and properly apply it. Some of the smartest, most intelligent people I know are complete idiots. So,
Doug, informed by whom?
Yeah, that's the other problem. Because I'm trying to inform people of the original intent of the Constitution, and I'm being called a crackpot, conspiracy theorist. I'm pushing old and antiquated ideas, and so on and so forth.
Wait, you mean values are old and antiquated? We don't have values anymore? Isn't that what we push? Nonsense.
Yeah. Well, here's something, and I'm gonna kind of go along the question that I had, but it's not quite. Okay. So at the beginning of the show, Warhamster talked about something with the CIA, and I've been dying to hear what that is. Would it be okay?
You got him grinning now.
Doug, is it okay if he shares that?
No, go for it. That's between you and the hamster. But he's grinning from ear to ear, so I have a feeling you're going to get exactly what you want.
Well, he knows.
Just be careful.
And
what you want.
Yeah, and what I see on things, the CIA has all, in the OSS, basically the same. That's what they turn into. But anyway, go ahead.
Well, we talked about it a couple of weeks ago. First time I came on your show, I talked a little bit about the origins of the CIA.
Yeah.
And, it started with Operation Underworld, started to merge in with the OSS, which was the predecessor of the CIA. Never forget that the British MI6 is the blueprint and the coaches of our intelligence. When you talk about American intelligence gathering and stuff like that, the alliance, the way they work together with the Five Eyes, which we heard a lot about during the Trump years. British intelligence and American intelligence are joined at the hip. They're influenced by these people in these dark, smoky rooms. These are the oligarchs. These are the true powers behind the throne of England and America. We just switched, who became the enforcement arm after World War II, because the British Empire was just, they'd expended themselves just like the Romans did once upon a time, just like the Venetians did once upon a time. But to really understand, who the CIA is, I think you have to go back to the British East India Company and how what they did in India and China by forcing the opium wars, using drug running as their major source of revenue as they enforce their geopolitical will upon countries on the other side of the globe. That's the exact same business model the CIA has been using ever since. I'm going to talk in a lot more detail about that Thursday night. And I'm going to get you some very specific people with some things that really happened with stuff I can document 100%. And the pattern's just really crystal clear. But at the end of the day, the CIA is the biggest drug runners on the planet. They have been. That was exposed during the Iran-Contra hearings, during the savings and loan crisis. Real fun little fact is John Hinckley Jr., the Hinckley family was in business in the SNL scandal, got caught red-handed with the third of the Bush sons, whose first name I just forgot, in Colorado. That's Hinckley, the guy who shot Reagan. Was their family was intertwined with the Bush family in the savings and loan scandal. Now, were the Bushes involved with trying to shoot Reagan? I have no friggin' idea. I mean, that's never been proven, but that's a heck of a coincidence. And I'd like, I think the question should have been asked, and no one ever asked it. So, when you talk about the CIA, this is, I mean, they've got capabilities. They're off the books. We've got this big thing with President Trump being raided at Mar-a-Lago. And I asked Doug the question, I go, do you think the president should have access to every bit of information? Could Donald Trump have walked into Langley CIA and said, open up your books, I want to see everything you're doing? Would they have said yes or no? They would have said no, because they're doing so much stuff they were never allowed to do. They never should be allowed to do. We have got a fourth branch of government operating behind the scenes, off the books. And, they're not even allowed to operate on domestic soil. Yet we know for a fact that they are, because of what's his name, who just took Russian citizenship. The CIA is involved in domestic spying. John Brennan was involved in Russiagate.
Oh, we could have Snowden, Edward Snowden.
Snowden. Thank you. Yeah, but he had to.
Tracy, careful, they're listening.
So Tracy, I work under the assumption that every single thing I say, type, or text, my handler at the FBI is listening to, or the CIA. It doesn't matter. I assume everything. It's okay because I don't break laws, but I also hope that, like Doug always says, maybe they're learning something.
Exactly.
Well, you want to know something? Is that actually kind of brought up something that I want to mention real quick. I don't know if Doug's familiar with TikTok. I don't have one, but people do.
I use TikTok. I am familiar with it, but I have not put any videos on it. I do plan to eventually start doing that.
God, don't. I'd have to disown you. That's the one platform we just can't do. Go ahead.
30-second Constitution lessons. That's the plan. But anyway, go ahead.
I mean, it's so common. I mean, the whole FBI handler thing is what I'm basically getting at. That's so commonly known now that actually Gen Zs are even making that in their reels. Like, this kid did a joke where he was trying to ask this girl out on a date, and he was going to type out this, lovely text to her, but then he erased it. And then all of a sudden he hears a ding on his phone, and it was that message that he erased. And he was like, what? And it pans to where he was playing, where it switches to him as the FBI agent. And like that the FBI agent put that in, and because they're always watching. Like, there's kind of a joke there, kind of like a ha-ha. But I think more and more people are realizing, hey, we're under constant observation, especially like you said, through the Patriot Act, which has always been. It's just they finally had a way to put it together.
Right, and the technology to act upon a lot of that stuff. Technology is, a very wonderful thing and a very bad thing simultaneously, just like anything. Anything can be used in a bad manner, in an evil manner. Everything is a tool. And unfortunately, they have taken that tool and utilized it in ways that we're not surprised of. But, and I mean, I even was surprised at when it comes to even just the tracking the bots, when it comes to places you visit and the ads that appear all over the place, when you visit sites even. They're watching everything.
My I like to tell myself that my FBI handler is one of the whistleblowers. He's going to come clean.
Because the war hamster taught him a few things.
I would hope so at this point.
During the Zoom class, every once in a while, I'll joke, but at the same time, I'm kind of serious because I know they're probably watching. I'll lean towards the camera and say, "FBI, CIA, did you catch that? You're learning something, right?"
Well, didn't you say a while back that you had some FBI agents at one of your in-person classes?
Up in Beaumont, we had a couple of gentlemen show up that we were 100% convinced were feds, and they weren't even that good at hiding what or who they were. I don't think, but what I didn't say, and I wish I would have said, and I thought of it in hindsight, is guys, you came on the wrong day. I'm teaching the Second Amendment next week, but nonetheless. But nonetheless, yeah, it was funny because after they had left, three of the guys that are in the class, and one of them, man, he's like, well, let's just say he reminds me a lot of the Storm Chaser. Matter of fact, they know each other and they get along beautifully. And he's like, "Dude, you know what those guys were, right?" And Dennis the voice Jackson was there, and he's like, "Yeah, those were feds, obviously." And I'm like, "Yeah, I figured that out. It was pretty obvious." But what was funny is they showed up at different times, like to make it look like they weren't connected, but then they sat in the same booth together. I just thought that was kind of funny. But anyway,
this like talking a bit, just kind of like.
Yeah.
But
it's like let me just. Can I jump in, Andrew?
Go ahead.
Well, this was super fast. Just let me say this real quick. For anyone who's got questions, I will actually put them in the screen like I did for Tracy. So ask questions, and I'll put them up so they can answer them. Go ahead.
All right, go ahead, Warhamster.
Oh, I was just going to say, it's funny that when the feds try to infiltrate the quote unquote patriot movement in person, we can spot them from a million miles away.
Sure.
You got these Patriot Front guys, running around wearing khakis. And yeah, we could. That's not who we are. We wear jeans and funny T-shirts that ridicule the left. I was at the one event in Long Beach. That's got to be a year and a half ago. Joe Biden was flying into Long Beach to give a presentation. We decided to give him a proper Southern California welcome. So me and about 10,000 of my closest friends got together around Long Beach State University, figured out the secret of how to know where Joe Biden was going to make his entrance. Is just follow the cops, the security guys. Long story short, there's about 15 to 20 Antifa guys trying to fit in with our group, and you just spot them a million miles away. They just don't look like us. They're not.
Yeah.
You can tell. It's really not that difficult to spot these guys.
Yeah.
Well, there was a question there. So, were you going to go to that next?
Yep. Snowden, what is his story from Tracy?
Oh boy. Did he follow proper protocols in his whistleblowing? Aren't you supposed to go to your department and get congressional, what have you, go on the record? Or did he realize that doing that would have got himself, Seth Riched? I don't know. I don't know what the story is, Tracy. There's a lot of theories on it.
Yeah, I will say this, though, about Snowden and the Constitution is it brought up a lot of questions that people hadn't been asking yet, that a lot of people began to ask. So it was good in this sense, such as, does the federal government, and more specifically the executive branch and its agencies and intelligence, world, the NSA and all of that through the Department of Defense, do they have too much power? Do they have too much ability to squash something that they disagree with or keep an eye on us, as we were just talking about? How do we resolve the tension that has risen between having liberty or being secure? because that's really what it's come down to now. Well, Doug, safety. Well, are you willing to lose your liberty for that safety? And that was a question that now we ask a lot because of the scamdemic. But when it came to Snowden, that's when that question really kind of started to bubble up. People hadn't really thought about it before. And then by releasing classified information that could be beneficial in a number of ways. Where's the line between traitor and whistleblower? Where's the line between patriot and insurrectionist? Was it a moral thing? So from a constitutional standpoint, was the federal government's reaction accurate? Was it reasonable? Was it authorized? And so it did present a lot of questions. Unfortunately, we haven't really answered all of them yet. I think the answers are pretty obvious in many cases. Yes, they have too much power. Snowden, I think, exposed things that needed to be exposed, not in the sense of the data that he exposed, but these questions. Hey, there is too much power. Hey, there is a problem with this dynamic. That's what he exposed, I think, was more valuable than any classified information he may have released.
Yeah, and I think you're spot on, Doug. I think you need to look. I think the big thing is with stuff like that, you need to look at it. So, for instance, law enforcement goes by this, which I think a lot of things should go by this. Is there's the letter of the law, and then there's the spirit of the law. And this could be some.
Is it me or is it him?
No, the volume cut out for me too.
Yeah,
Andrew,
your mic went out.
Andrew, we can't hear you. Andrew, we couldn't hear probably the last 10, 15 seconds. We'll let you know when we can.
Yeah, it might be a connection issue there. Maybe unplug, replug, something like that.
Well, they do have.
My camera's been doing weird stuff. I don't know if you've seen it. I've seen it anyway. It'll white out or flicker or something. But
I generally don't look at you while we're on these things. I'm just staring at myself the whole time. So I don't know.
Well, yeah, that's. Yeah.
No,
that's fair because you're such an attractive hamster.
There you go. Now, Tracy says something interesting. She goes, I know there is no short answer, but was puzzled by the fact that he's now applying for dual citizenship. If anybody got the chance to read the transcribed Vladimir Putin speech earlier this week, and then our buddy Storm Chaser actually sent me a video earlier today on the same topic of a Putin speech from a year and a half ago. He talks about what we're dealing with here in the Western world, Western culture.
Hold on.
I know. Andrew's fixing his audio, so now we're getting the echo and feedback. Oh, we got two Andrews. Wow.
That's scary thought, isn't it?
There we go.
Some pretty fancy stuff.
Wow.
I thought one was more than
iPad
right,
Pro.
very good.
That's also I'm looking at over here, and this is not sponsored by Apple. And I was trying to see if there's a way that I could kind of work it out, or I switch to the iPad in case the iPhone was having a problem. So.
Oh, I got you. Okay. But anyway, continue, please, Warhamster.
Yeah, let me just finish thought. These Vladimir Putin speeches, if you listen to the transcription, the guy literally, so my buddy says, hey, he goes, Brady, did you write that speech for him? I go, no, I didn't, obviously. But he's talking about all the problems with woke culture and how he goes, look, we dealt with this in Russia in the 1920s and 30s. We understand what this cultural Marxism is all about. We've seen it. You're dealing with it today. Now, we know for a fact after I've been, like I said earlier.
As our friend Todd likes to say, these are all cycles throughout history and throughout different civilizations. It's just our turn.
French Jacobins. Is it Jacobins or Jacobins? No one's ever told me I think it's Jacobins. But it's the same idea. It's cultural.
I've always called them Jacobins. We'll go with it.
Fair enough. And Putin's saying that we have no idea why the West is so insane. And with the Primakov Doctrine, which was this guy Primakov in Russia came out with about 24 years ago, basically says, look, our part of the world, and most of the world has basically been dominated by this Anglo-American alliance and what they call their rules-based order. that the Clintons and the Bushes and the Obamas have been talking about ad nauseum. Kerry, this rules-based order. But what it means is basically we bully the rest of the world using the Bank of International Settlements, using the World Bank, using all of these different methodologies. And we have a monopolar world where the Anglo-American alliance tells everybody what to do. And if you don't march in order, we overthrow your government for corporate interests. This is the all wars are banker wars theme here. And what the Russians have been trying to do is say, look, we want a multipolar world. I happen to agree. Now, that's not in America's best interest in the short term, but it is in the long term that gets the globalist bankers out of our lives and off.
That's funny because it brings up a historical perspective. If you don't mind me interrupting for a second.
Please.
King John, after King Richard, was a weak king, and England really kind of became the dirt hole of the world under his leadership. And Philip from France wanted to invade and just take it over. But the Pope would never, because the Holy Roman Empire, France was part of the Holy Roman Empire, and the Pope would never okay it. Why? Because while Britain, who should I say, England at the time, they weren't Britain yet, England at the time was weak under King John, and it was a problem. The fact is, having a king in England, weak or not, was a nice counterpunch against, or a counter tactic against a too powerful Philip. So in other words, the Pope didn't allow the invasion to kind of keep Philip kind of on his heels, because as long as there's some opposition, it kind of kept him honest. And so I think that's kind of this this world where we have multiple powers that you're talking about. It does. It keeps the other, keeps the multiple powers kind of honest, because they've got to deal with each other rather than rather than a consolidation of power globally.
Yeah, that's what I talk about with tax competition. If one regime like America has a very authoritarian tax regime, the smart money is going to move the money to Canada. It's going to have a softer or elsewhere. And that's how you keep competition, keeps these authorities in check. It's a big deal. And having a multipolar currency alliance will make it for a much more competitive world, and it'll make it harder for these monopolies and these concentrated powers and interests
and all that. Yeah, well, yeah, exactly. Matter of fact, even the founders talked about that kind of thing when it came to multiple. Because Madison, let's back up a little bit. So George Washington and Adams spoke out against political parties. It said that these multiple factions would be the death of us. James Madison agreed and disagreed. He agreed that, yeah, it's a problem, but number one, we do it naturally. Number two, they will keep the other one from taking full power. So the competition between them is a good thing. That was James Madison's position. And so it really ties into the same conversation. This is nothing new, is the point. We see these cycles throughout history. And what works is the power structure keeping each other on each other's heels.
We've been
time for a glass of wine for War Hamsters, so I am going to then defer back to you for the next question. Now, that said, we have been an hour and a half in. Typically, here's what I tell people. It's an hour show that usually goes at least an hour and a half.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it seems like
there's a lot of stuff to talk about.
Yeah, well, I've noticed we keep stretching out time, which obviously we can't, do a 6-hour show, but it's
and eventually we know my wife will poke her head in and ask me to take her out to dinner or something. I actually didn't dress for it tonight. I got the t-shirt. I typically, my habit when I'm online, when I'm in front of a camera, or I do shows or I do classes or something like that, I kind of have a tendency. I'm not going to say a strict policy, because it's obviously not overly strict, because I broke it tonight. But I tend to make sure I have a collared shirt. I've always felt like having a collared shirt on is the best way to present myself. However, I had such a busy day, and I had on this shirt because I was doing stuff, And then by the time the show came up, I was like, oh man, I don't have time to put on a collared shirt. We'll be okay.
That's
But there you go. But typically, I'm a collared shirt guy, and I recommend most people when they get on camera or do things that at least have a collared shirt. I know one particular friend of mine who used to fight against collared shirts, but then he has since changed his mind.
Yeah.
Not that we'll mention names, but he leaves droppings.
Since unfortunately I got muted by the CIA, um,
or the FBI.
right, whoever. Anyway, to kind of finish that thought, so because anyway, they should look at things. It's like they look at the letter of the law at their convenience, for one. But I think we should look at things in the sense of, yes, there's a letter of the law, but what's the spirit of the law?
Well, see, but that's dangerous, and here's why. Because then what they start doing is they start interpreting things, and they start implying things. The law says what it says. I understand what you're trying to say with the spirit of the law, but I actually think that's kind of a dangerous route. I get what you're saying.
Then why
but when you're dealing with tyrants,
yeah.
You've got to be as specific as possible. The problem is, and this is my description of the enemy, and when I say the enemy, I mean anti-constitution, anti-republican form of government type people. So that encompasses a much larger group than just a particular party. Is what's the answer to the question for them? Whatever benefits them most at the moment, even if it contradicts what they said 10 seconds ago.
Yeah.
I mean, and that's where, when we get into spirit of the law or implied powers or interpretation, we run a risk. I understand what you're saying, but really, I try to deal as much as I can in specifics so that I can shoot down anything they try to throw at me, because I can say spirit of law, but then they say, well, that's a matter of interpretation. It's not a matter of interpretation. Here's what it says. That's the way I present things.
Well, there's got to be a way to protect citizens that are whistleblowers opposed to selling secrets. I mean, there's a difference between selling secrets for your own gain and whistleblowing. And there's got to be a way, because that goes back to the whole CIA thing, that goes back to the Department of Energy that I've been like pounding on the desk about. I mean, there's so much there, but the issue is that people are held in by the government with non-disclosure agreements. They're held in with, if you say something, we're going to assassinate you. There's actual supposedly there's assassination teams in the government that when you cross that, when you share secrets that you're not supposed to, they get you.
All right. So here's a question for you. So would clarity in the language of the law, or the spirit of the law, fix that? Yes or no?
No, but transparency would.
No. See, the problem here is not the way it's worded. It's not the way it's meant. It's not whether or not it's clarified. The problem is evil people. Evil exists. And so, therefore, you can't address the law and how it's written. You have to address the evil people.
Yeah.
So, and transparency is definitely one of those ways to basically keep them honest.
Evil people cannot thrive in a transparent world. They require secrecy. If they have got to unzip their fly every single day, we're going to know what's underneath. That's what transparency is all about. And there's no reason for our government to have secrets from us or from other governments if we're dealing honestly.
Right.
And it's almost like a cart before the horse, or a self-fulfilling prophecy. If you're playing these reindeer games, other countries are going to play the same reindeer games.
Right.
Yeah. It is what it is. If we're spying on Russia, Russia has to spy on us, and China, and vice versa. Well, China, different story. That's communist or totalitarian at the very least, whether they call it communism these days or not. But that never would have happened if we hadn't been playing all the cloak and dagger games for the several centuries before that. And none of this gamesmanship, none of this chicanery would exist if we had a transparent government. And we're the United States of America. We should set the example. We've got nothing to fear from foreign powers.
Well, go ahead.
Now, the problem is we do have a lot to fear from internal powers because they operate in secrecy.
Well, here's something that maybe could be a partial solution. So we need total transparency. I think that we need to protect the ones that are trying to reveal truth that needs to be done. But maybe, I don't know what the constitutionality of this, and Doug, that's where you can obviously give us that feedback.
Sure.
Is there a way that maybe if Congress needs something secret, maybe that's on a server that only, which I know that there's always ways around this, but I mean, that's on a server that no one from outside can access, and as far as outside the country, and it's, only we could see it or something. I mean, there's got to be some way where there could be secrets to protect the country, but also have transparency to where we know, hey, what's going on. Because like I said, with between the government, between corporations, I think that's one of the biggest things that's causing all these problems in the first place. There's so many of, hey, this is what I'm saying. Then they're holding their hand back for the lobbyists to give them money for whatever, so that way things can get pushed. I mean, at the end of the day, this needs to be taken care of. And like I said, I get secrets, but if there needs to be secrets, there's got to be a better way to go about it. But
well, I think a part of that is getting back to where all money spent has to be fully transparent. There can be no secrets on money spent. Now, if the transparency has to be for a program regarding this, but we can't go into details of it, at least give us the general, that's better than nothing. But I think if they have to, if we are required to see every expenditure, exactly where it went, even if it's a general description, but where it went, I think that might cut down on it.
Well, let's talk real quick about 1,400 or 1,800 page bills.
Just be aware, by the way, Mrs. Constitution, Mrs. Pistachio, whatever you want to call my lovely wife, just tried to call me, which means she just got off work. So I got 10 or 15 minutes before she pokes her head in. So anyway, so she's my alarm clock on when I got to end.
Yeah, my wife does the same thing.
But anyway, go ahead, Warhamster, please.
I'm sorry, I'm busy typing. You guys talk. I'm typing in the chat right now.
Well, then I'll keep going on a thought. I mean, it's like I said, there's got to be something that could be done. I mean, we've let the government get so broad into everything. It's like they may not.
Let's ask this. Let's ask this. Have you looked at the graph regarding crime in this country?
No.
If you go back 100 years and you look at the graph regarding crime and you watch it, and then suddenly there's a point where it starts going like this. It just takes this sudden sharp angle upward. Do you know when it starts to do that? About 1963, about the mid-60s. What happened in 1963?
Kennedy was assassinated.
No, that's 62.
Was it?
I
thought it was 63. I think it's 63,
was it 63?
Doug. I think it's 63.
I thought it was 62. But anyway, prayer was taken out of schools. You take God out of it, you start heading in a really bad direction.
And I'll take you back to 1934. And what happened in 1934? The Frankfurt School was a communist school in Germany right when Hitler took power, and they were teaching all these cultural Marxist ideas. And they realized, oh my goodness, these American-backed fascists are going to probably kill us. So these 9 professors from the Frankfurt School got transported and given jobs at Columbia University, right in New York. And they've been pushing this cultural Marxism ever since. And that's where you get guys like Marcuse and another guy right here down the road at UCSD. Marcuse ended up here at UCSD. But yeah, that's... the university, American universities, accepted this Marxism, and they've been basically pushing these ridiculous ideas. And you can look this up. They had these 10 goals of Marxism, what they're going to do to America. They had to erode the family. They had to erode the church. They had to erode our values. And it started in the 30s, and you can see this with what we talked about with McCarthyism.
Because they realized where the strength of America is. Alexis de Tocqueville, when he came here in the 1830s, recognized the strength was in our churches. But according to the 2021 film Enemies Within the Church, the Chinese Academy of Social Sciences, the communist regime, They had been studying America for about 20 years. And they were studying America to try to figure out what it was that was ultimately responsible for the unprecedented success of the United States. And an official of the Communist Chinese Academy of Social Sciences said that after their 20-year study of the West, that they studied everything. They studied the historical, political, economic, and cultural perspective of the United States. And at first, they thought that the reason why we were so powerful is because we had bigger guns, more powerful guns than they've got. Then they thought it might be because we had the best political system. Then they focused on our economic system. But over 20 years, what they realized was that the heart of our culture was our religion, Christianity. And now understand, these people who were atheists, and they determined through their study that the reason why the West was so powerful was the Christian moral foundation of social and cultural life. That made possible the emergence of capitalism, free market system, and a successful transition into our type of political system and what we have. And then at the final sentence of their report, after exclaiming all that, the official says, "We do not have any doubt about this." I mean, think of the irony here. The communist Chinese are looking to find out what it is that makes us tick so well. And they say, yeah, the political system's good. Yeah, we got a good military. But the real reason behind it all is this virtuous foundation based on Christian faith. No wonder they want to destroy the family. They want to destroy the culture. They want to destroy the difference between a man and a woman and all that. Because they have to destroy that culture.
The irony here, Doug, is that not only were the Chinese the inventors of capitalism, but they also had an incredible belief system 2,000 years ago called Confucianism that from a morality standpoint is very similar to Christianity in terms of values and respect for other people. And they lost that over the centuries, because they got corrupted. That's why you had, China never was able to quite live up to its potential. But I mean, it's an amazing history, but they should have known that already. They shouldn't have had to study
there's also there is a Chinese tradition that kind of ties from that. I can't remember the name of it now. It's like Yao Lin or something like that. It's a Fin or something Fin, or it's like a dance presentation now we see here in the United States. It was outlawed in China, and it actually champions that moral foundation and the tradition of what China really is. And the Epoch Times newspaper, they actually are believe in that and kind of push all of that. But and that's how I kind of learned about that. But yeah, exactly. If you and you can even go back to Rome. When I was reading Cicero one time, I came across an interesting quote. As they were getting ready to go from what Cicero believed to be a Roman Republic to an empire under Caesar, Julius Caesar, he says in one of his quotes, "We have lost our moral traditions. We have lost our traditions of how we operate in our culture, and if we don't return to it, our culture is doomed." Not exact words, I'm paraphrasing, but that's basically what he said. When I read that, I was like, wow. What is so different has not changed. It's really the same stuff, just different story, different country, different, and it's the same thing all over again. And now that goes back to what I said early on in tonight's podcast, videocast, whatever you want to call it, is these are cycles that go throughout history. Now it's our turn. It's our turn to go through it, and we better figure it out, because every time in history we see this happen, collapse happens. So we're gonna have to. So if we want to break history, we're gonna have to figure out a way to keep from the collapse happening.
Hard times breed strong men. Strong men bring good times. We're halfway through the hard times, but it's still early, and we're getting stronger by the day.
Well, that sounds like the forgive me, Doug, if you already said this, but that clock method that you were talking about, where we go through the certain point that eventually gets to total tyranny, and then it goes back through that cycle again. Is that what you're referencing through that point, Doug?
What are you talking about, like the Tytler cycle?
Yes.
Yeah, that's exactly what I just quoted.
Yeah. Yeah, I would say yeah, but it's even deeper than that. The Tytler cycle is one example of one person recognizing these cycles, and it's a very good representation of what these cycles are. Of course, there's going to be certain variances with each one, but basically, as Tytler provided, the cycles are pretty much the same. You know, you start in tough times, bondage. The strong men appear, but also what appears is spiritual faith. You have spiritual faith; it makes those strong men who went through the tough times courageous, and when they're courageous, are willing to fight for liberty, and liberty is the response. And once you have liberty, you have prosperity and abundance. But then, out of that abundance are the not so tough times. Now you've got the weaker men, and you've got the apathy and the complacency, and then ultimately dependency on government and a consolidation of power in government, and then ultimately back to bondage. So Tytler definitely lays it out beautifully. But
If I may, Doug,
like I said, it's gone throughout history. Tytler's just is the best, I think, presentation there. Go ahead.
if I may, just this ties into what I was saying earlier about the Carroll Quigley observations about military technology, whether it's equal with the people, are they equal with the government, and not over the course of time. They seem to match liberty and technology, and there's other economic issues involved here. But things are cyclical. We've gone through periods of liberty and tyranny throughout mankind's
Sure.
history. At the end of the day, the one constant has been these oligarchs seem to continue to enrich themselves throughout every cycle of history, and when the tide turns against them, they have the ability to kind of disappear into the woodwork and reemerge later. But
now we are approaching the 2 hour mark, and so Chris, I appreciate you, brother. And if they want to talk about CIA for a little bit longer or something like that, I'm more than
no,
happy to participate.
that's Thursday.
But I think it's yeah, I think Thursday that is a good teaser for those of you to appear on Thursday. I'll make sure I get out a link to my list on how to get a hold of that. And I also one of the things I've learned in my short little life is usually presentations that go beyond an hour to an hour and a half usually start to lose people. Now that said, we're pretty darn interesting. We might be able to get away with 2 hours regularly, but most people's attention span hour and a half, and so I would suggest that we tie it off for the evening. Now that said, next Thursday, what was the plan here? Because like I said, I could, because I will be in a place where I'll have access to my phone, and I'll be able to get on the show, but it'll be through my phone rather than my computer. But whatever you guys plan to do, I'll try to participate.
Well, next Thursday, Doug, is next. You're talking about
because
next
Liberty
Friday's
matters.
Andrews.
Thanks, Tracy.
Yeah. No, next Thursday's my live class in Carlsbad. I'd love if you watched it. We don't need your participation. I want you to enjoy your time away. Next Friday, that's Andrew's show. That would be a week from today. It's up to him whether we do this or not. So I'll leave you guys can negotiate that. And I'm the third wheel here. This is you guys.
But you definitely add the salt and pepper that it needs to, add a little flavor that it needs, so I appreciate you being here.
Yeah.
And also, like we've kind of joked about, Warhamster and I have some other things that we're also planning on, and this is sort of like our spring training. This is our opportunity to really get used to each other on shows too, and Andrew gets to benefit from it by hanging out with these two eccentric individuals.
Yeah, that's 100% right. Well, I think maybe the last 10 minutes of the show should be housekeeping. Anything that Doug's going to be doing up soon, Warhamster, and then also anything that will be, if we do want to extend it, I at least want to be able to close the show, and then if we extend it, we could call it Warhamster's Corner, and that's like 10, 15 minutes or whatever he wants to do.
Warhamster's Corner.
I didn't want to say the hamster wheel because
yeah.
I mean, as far as next Friday, the thing Thursday, are you having me on that, or what was your plan with?
Or no, for you to visit to watch as a Zoomer, I think was the plan, right?
Yeah, Doug, I'll give you the Zoom link a day in advance so you can send it out to all your people, and Andrew, you can do the same. It'll just be me doing a live show in front of our regular Constitution class that Doug teaches. He's gone. I sometimes come up with interesting subjects, and our group locally we don't like to take a week away from each other. So when Doug's gone, doing Doug things, I've stepped in the role and tried to entertain them. And
it's a great group. I have 6 classes, but that one down at Carlsbad, I will have to say, it's become quite the community. It really has. It really does come across as like a little family, and it's kind of fun. And one of the joys I get as someone who hosts these classes is I get to watch people who would not have known each other otherwise become friends and co-patriots, and it's it's definitely fun to watch, and I enjoy it. There's a gentleman named Bill in the class who says, right now I've got the best set of friends I've ever had, and it's it's basically because of that class and some of the stuff that he does, and then he also cracks me up because he says, yeah, sometimes we only get to a sentence, but I still learn more about the Constitution with that one sentence because we talk about all that context. And,
yeah, but and agreeing with Doug, it's more than that. This is pretty much our political action group. We're the people that are out there getting people to sign petitions to recall Gavin Newsom. We're the ones promoting candidates. We got out of class last night. We all dashed. We closed the class down. We shut Doug up early, which never happens, just so we can get over to support the woman Sharon McKean.
Threw me out the door practically.
Sharon's been on Fox News several times. She's the one who started to let them breathe, and she's running for school board in Carlsbad, 8 minutes away from class. And we had to get over there to support her because this is a hero. And our community, this is how we built up the grassroots movement of North County, San Diego, which is, in my opinion, pretty close to the Boston of 1776.
Well, it's pretty close to the committees of safety that were forming locally back in 1775, 1776 also. So it really does have a time period feel to it.
And I will add that I would not have met the lady hamster if it was not for this local activism. And the coolest thing is when you meet a gal at these activist events, you got a pretty good idea that you got a lot in common, and it makes a relationship a lot easier to start.
Well, my joke to a handful of people about that has been, I'm not a matchmaker, but I am the common thread.
Let me
take credit for this so much.
let me get this said real quick. As far as for Friday, would you be opposed to maybe merging the two shows on Thursday for your thing, and then
I won't be able to participate on Thursday. I would rather us do this Friday separately as it is with our roundtable here. But I do encourage everybody to tune in to the Zoom on Thursday. Now, understand, as a Zoomer, while you will be able to participate in the sense of the chat, because there will be someone who's watching the chat, to present questions, or at least there tends to be. At the same time, it's not going to be as interactive as something like this. So I would not merge the two. I would keep this on Friday and do it as is. Now, that said, there's a possibility on Friday I might be on the road, and if that's the case, then it'll be the two of you guys. But either way, I think you guys ought to be consistent. So whether or not I'm able to show up on Friday, I would suggest, Andrew, that you guys try to keep this show consistent, because people, when they get used to something being on, it's important for it to be consistently on.
Sure. Okay.
And if Ward Hamster would be more than happy, if he would be happy to participate, even if I'm absent, I would be fine with that.
I think I'm okay. I do have to check with Lady Hamster. She does have some control of my social calendar, but I think I'm good for next Friday.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, that however it works. I mean, it's like I said, it's I'm fairly flexible. For whatever reason, it seems like with my work schedule, and then for whatever reason, the last 2 Fridays, it's been like really, luckily we moved the time up 30 minutes, which helped. So that's why.
I've done that to stuff too. But way back long ago, I used to have my Constitution classes at 5:30. Then I moved them to 6. One of them I actually moved to 6:30 for a while because sometimes you got to do what you got to do. But if people appreciate what you're doing, they'll adjust as necessary. But once you find that slot, you want to be as consistent as possible. That all said, I heard Mrs. Constitution, Mrs. Pistachio's voice in the other room earlier, but she decided not to poke her head in. But she is home, so I'm going to say adieu. But I will do this as I love to do it. Politicalpistachio.com, DouglasVGibbs.com. United we stand, combined we kick butt. God bless America, my friends. God bless you. See you next week.
Love you, brother. See you. Talk soon, Doug.
All right.
So, Andrew, you want to call this the hamster wheel, the hamster corner, whatever you want to call it? I actually have I brought something fun for you. So you guys may want to stick around, even though Doug signed off. This will be interesting, I think. So, guys, hope you keep watching. So in the financial markets this week, we saw an almost implosion. You talk about the British gilts. The London Bank had to step in and buy their own bonds. Basically, the same thing our Federal Reserve does with quantitative easing and stuff like that. But they did this on the massive scale. And the question is, why did they do this? Well, they did this to bail out pension funds and pension managers. Companies like BlackRock got margin calls. And you get a margin call, which means you've pledged collateral, and the collateral's gone down in value, and the people you're borrowing the money from or the securities from say, these securities don't have enough value to hold up the loan. You got to come up with cash. And what they end up doing is you have to sell things like British bonds to raise the cash, which feeds into the entire system of why the bonds go down in value, yields go up, interest rates. So it's the whole thing's crashing. But what's really interesting is the great financial crisis of 2008 and 9 was about a $24 trillion derivatives problem. And if I can share my screen, I'm going to do this real quickly. So $24 trillion almost crashed the entire financial system 10 years ago. And by the way, just for the record, we should have let these banks fail. Because we'd be in a much better place today. And I'm going to show you a fun little chart. Andrew, can you tell me when you can see this? And I'll blow it up a little bit. Can you see it now? Andrew, you seeing my screen?
No, I cannot. Hang on. That is horrible. Anyway, no, I cannot.
Let me just see if it's showing up in the YouTube. All right, hang on one second. I got to show you this chart. You should be seeing a bunch of graphs. Can you see it now? Well, if you can't see it, I'll stop the share and I'll just explain it to you so I can do it with words. What I was pulling up was the Bank of International Settlements, who tracks all of the global derivatives market. And if you remember in 2009, there was all these banks were trading derivatives on real estate, mortgage-backed bonds and stuff like that, and derivatives of them. That was about $25 trillion, almost took down the whole financial system. The interest rate swap market is just on the over-the-counter market is $700 trillion alone. That almost went to default this week, and nobody's talking about it. That is the real global economic risk that I've been talking about for a decade, is if these derivatives markets ever implode, and the bankers, they're rational, and they can make a good argument. We'll say that's okay. There may be $700 trillion worth of this, but there's 350 million on the buy side and 350 million on the sell side. So the net is zero. The problem is when net becomes gross. So if I borrow 10 trillion from you, Andrew, and you borrow 10 trillion from Doug, and Doug borrows 10 trillion from me, it only works as long as all three of us still trust each other. And the second one of us runs into financial difficulty, we're going to tell the other one, now you need to post more capital. And it becomes like this whole pile-on effect. That's what almost happened this week. And it's still the global financial system is incredibly vulnerable to these interest rate swaps in this global derivatives market. If something goes wrong when net becomes gross, we've got a problem that cannot be bailed out by the Federal Reserve or anything else. Now, I don't think that the Great Reset people want this to go down that way. They're trying to keep it from happening, and I appreciate that because that's not a pretty scenario, but it's in play because of this interest rate garbage and this ridiculous management of global economic policy. So, anyways, I thought that'd be fun to share.
Yeah. Sorry about all that for everyone, and also for Warhamster. I was trying to figure out some stuff, and I thought I muted things, and then it started echoing. So I'm learning how to play with this and try to make things move around. I was able to, the screen that you shared, though, I was able to put it in the screen. I've learned how to do that. So in the future, if you ever want to share anything, I think I'm able to do it through it. But
well, let me try to do it again. Can I try to share again?
Sure.
Yeah, because this table is really interesting. And it's bis.org. You can find this stuff anytime you want. This is tracked.
All right.
And right up here, you're seeing all contracts are 600 trillion. These are trillions of dollars.
There you go. I did it.
And you have currency swaps, you've got options, but it's just a ridiculous amount of money. The one to pay attention to right now is the pound sterling. That's $10 trillion of derivatives, 14 trillion by the end of 2021. The funny part about this is they're listing, if you see over here on the right-hand side, they're talking about gross market value versus notional. That's not what they should be listing. They should be listing gross versus net. And this is a problem. It is a risk. Our financial system has been vulnerable for quite some time. I think we survive it, by the way. I'm not preaching doom and gloom, go buy gold and silver or crypto or anything like that, although being prepared for a worst case scenario is not the worst idea in the world. But our financial system should have been allowed to implode in 2009, that they didn't allow it to do. That's called creative destruction. If you have a broken system, let it fail. Let the banks go down. The rest of us are going to be fine. We'll deal with 5 years of recession, and we'll build it right back up, and we'll come up with better ideas. That wasn't allowed to happen because the globalists don't like taking losses.
Yeah,
that's gold. That was Goldman Sachs, manipulating our government. Henry Paulson, our politicians just bending the knee, and that's actually how and why Obama got, actually ended up getting elected. And let me ask you a question, Andrew. How many bankers ever went to jail for the financial crisis in 2009 during the Obama years?
Honestly, I cannot recall one.
Your recollection is perfect. The answer is 0. And that's crap because they were committing crimes.
Yeah. I mean, I know of many crimes, especially like Wells Fargo's fiasco with the ghost accounts. I mean, employees got arrested. Employees got fired. Employees... I think there's 10,000 employees, but no one other than that was held accountable. No.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. We got Bernie Madoff. Great. Took you 25 years to do that, but we're proud because we investigated Bernie Madoff. And, I've got clients to this day are still getting like $25 a month from the Bernie Madoff payoff funds, even though they lost millions of dollars. It's... you talked earlier about the SEC and we talked about FDR and that's good banking regulations. It's all been politicized. Yeah, who appoints the head of the SEC? Who does the prosecution? It's all political. And these people, and how do you get elected? Well, you have to get money from the same people you're supposed to allegedly be prosecuting. And it's a problem.
I got a question for you. What do you think about the Securities Investment Act? I mean, employees got arrested. Employees got fired. Employees got fined. Employees got held accountable. No.
Yeah.
I don't know how much longer I'll be on here. The wife texted, but we'll have to figure out a show that we could put on here, like a video every now and again that we could put on here on this channel, because I don't mind doing that. But here's something that's interesting, because bankers fund war, or deal with the wars and stuff like that. You mentioned that many times. I thought it was interesting that everyone back in the time of World War I said that World War I was the war to end all wars. Do you think there's something behind that? Like that maybe every war after that, it's basically become governments versus people?
Boy, I tell you, that's a deep question, Andrew. I think because it was my take's going to be shallow. I just think that's what they were saying, that because it was the first time we had a quote unquote world war, and remember, my stance is that war never needed to happen. There was for no reason. It was ridiculous. And Archduke Ferdinand, they meant nothing to Johnny Appleseed in Kentucky. But why is Johnny Appleseed going over there to fight this war? So we have to defeat the Hessians, who are Germans, but they weren't part of Archduke. It made no sense. It was nonsense to start with. It might have just been a grand experiment in how badly they can manipulate the masses. And somebody, I saw a T-shirt earlier today. We should, what is it? We should defund the 20th century. The whole 20th century politics were terrible. Let me see if I can find this. It was a really good statement.
The reason why it's just interesting that because I hear that a lot. I even heard that on MASH. Sherman Potter, said it was the war to end all wars, and it's like, did all wars technically end? Or let's say most, because not all wars are funded by the elite, or the bankers, but it's at least the ones that they cover, I guess.
Well, people don't fight wars with people, and governments fight wars with governments, and the people pay the price. It's not okay. War should just be done. We should never have another war. Period.
Yeah. Do you think this is going to go back to the Atomic Energy Commission? Do you think that one of the reasons why the CIA was brought into play, the Atomic Energy Commission, nuclear weapons, bunch of nuclear secrets, do you think that was also maybe kind of now I've no proof on this, and people that are watching, the great thing about War Hamster is that I could trust that it's been researched properly, and it's not just off of conspiracy and like, hey, here's my speculation. War Hamster will say, this is what I think, but I don't know for sure, and I just want to say I appreciate that.
Thank you. That's a great compliment.
But as far as, and I am speculating here, do you think that a lot of those things, and the fact that there are secrets that were meant to never come out, it kind of comes back to basically throughout the 40s, the 50s, supposedly Bill Clinton revealed this out of being a great patriot or something, but we were doing tests on retarded children with radioactive material. We've been doing, it seems like after that point, we started doing experiments and mutilations, like for instance, cow mutilations. Someone was mentioning that, obviously people, oh, it's aliens. Someone brought up a good point that what if it's the government testing something and they're hiding it under the guise of extraterrestrials to hide what they're actually doing? Because it seems like after 1947, the CIA came into place. The Atomic Energy Commission was formed. There's a couple other things I forgot, but that's also when things started as far as testing on our own cattle, testing on, I'm sure, our own food, and testing on us.
So what you're suggesting ties into this big worldview I've been talking about how these oligarchical families have been controlling the governments, even though we have a quote unquote, the American Constitution is supposed to protect us from this. Now they've infiltrated it. They've created a democracy where they're able to manipulate who runs by their money. They've taken control of all the Western governments. And are you suggesting that these people have a plan that was been expressed in writing by people like H.G. Wells and Huxley and everyone like that over the last 150 years? Yeah, that's entirely possible. Is there a government behind the government doing all kinds of things? Do they have technology above and beyond what they're releasing to the public? Of course, that's entirely possible and seems to be likely. We just can't prove a lot of it. So I think your question is, yeah, it's 100% plausible. And I would not be remotely stunned if a lot of this stuff ends up being true.
Yeah, and, for instance, Stephen Greer, it all kind of sparks whenever he mentioned, because again, I don't believe in extraterrestrials. We get into the whole interdimensional, all that stuff, but that's not where I'm going with this. But he said that they supposedly had created fake aliens that the military used to abduct people, but not, necessarily for experiments in the sense of extraterrestrials, but to, do experiments on us. I'm sure vaccines probably came from that, because we also got one of the Nazi scientists, I forgot what his name was, Dr. Blum. He was big in vaccines, and it makes me kind of wonder, is that what's really going on at Area 51? Chemical disposal, waste disposal, nuclear experiments. I wonder if there's so much going on that's normal and explainable, but evil, but they're hiding under things that you can't prove, and that you could easily dismiss someone as a crazy person or as a conspiracy theorist.
Well, that's why the CIA created the term conspiracy theorist, so we couldn't, when we talked about it, we'd seem like nut jobs.
Yeah.
But if you take a step back, what are these people's, what is their main goal? These super national organizations. I mean, these are people that have more power than God, on Earth, than anything you could ever want. They want to live forever. They want immortality. They don't want to die. They're trying to use technology for it. Of course, they're experimenting on human beings to find out how this mechanism called a human body works, so they can find a way to plug themselves into their matrix. And this is transhumanism. They've been working towards this for more than a century. Of course, they're going to do anything to make it happen. That's
with the brain chip. Here's the thing. Here's the facts. One day they will go before the Lord and they will be judged for these things. One day they will be held accountable, and, I truly believe, that, there's nothing to worry about because we are in the Lord's hands, and it's, that's one of the things that Doug also talks about, which I think is very true, is when you have a country when you have a family, a country, anything that has people together, when it's centered around Christ, is centered around the Lord, it works. And once you remove that and remove any morality, it's the devil's playground. And I think because, of the removal of all these things, all these constitutional pillars that we have, a Christian nation, all the different things that they've done in the place, they've literally, now they can do whatever they want. And like I said, they're going to get, the banker families, all the cabal, everybody's is gonna get it eventually, if they're not saved, and if they can be Christians, I don't know. I mean, that's between them and the Lord, right?
No, From your lips to God ears, and I'm a believer. I'm a Christian, so I'm on the same page with you. And and I hope to God you're right about all of this stuff. But they don't. They believe they're the new gods, and they're going to create their own immortality. And one of the things I learned in like Psych 101 freshman year of college is that one of mankind's most important desires or primary needs is for immortality. And throughout history, we do this by procreating. by having children and families and leaving a legacy. The founding fathers talked about this with their posterity, and these guys have been dead 200 years, and we still very much appreciate what they did. That's posterity, done really well. If you don't care about that stuff and you want immortality for yourself, and you don't believe in God, of course you're going, and you've got the kind of power these people do, and when you've got more money than you need, you're going to be working towards this to extend your life forever. And that's why, that's what transhumanism is. It's these people are rejecting God, saying I don't want to trust in blind faith, or what they would call blind faith, and I'm going to plug myself into a computer and I'm going to live forever. Which would be fine if you just become part of a computer game, but they want to keep manipulating those of us on Earth. I would have no problem saying, hey, guess what, Bill Gates? Go ahead when you're 90 years old and plug yourself into a computer and create all these different fanciful scenarios and keep your brain alive as long as it's physically possible. It could be for 1,000,000 years. But you should have no impact on the real tangible world for people of us that don't believe like you do. That's the problem, is they think that they want to force it upon us.
Well, and the Bible is very clear on those who exalt themselves will be humbled, and those who humble themselves will be exalted. It's a biblical principle. Let me ask you this real quick, and I'm sorry for interrupting you. But for one, when was the FDA established? Do you know?
FDA is 1913, Rockefellers and Carnegie's, same year we did the Federal Reserve.
Yeah, so I mean, here's something that my wife pointed out about Skittles that I didn't even know, is that it's got a toxic component in it that's actually banned in other countries.
Of course it does. Not remotely shocked.
Right, and there's other things that other countries are not doing that we are. We've always been, I guess, the world's experiment. I wonder if the people behind the curtain, the wizard, as it were, of their own Oz, whatever that is, I wonder if they're. I guess I'm kind of going into a conspiracy with this. It's speculation. I have no proof, but I've always heard that the Nazis never lost the war. They just went to America. Operation Paperclip. I wonder if they're still, if they are here and their influence is here and they're trying to create their own Aryan race, and basically they're trying to weed out and select who they want. I mean, foods are loaded. I mean, Tracy's right. I mean, I think the best thing that we need to do in this country is be natural, as natural as possible, homestead, I mean, homesteading used to be encouraged. Now it's you're weird or you're odd. But I mean, here's the thing. Why do you trust the government on some things, but also you don't trust them on others? Like, oh, I don't trust the government with this, but why do you trust them with this? Makes sense? Like, there's so much. Unfortunately, I think we'd have to make a series on this, but there's so much going on. That where it's just kind of like, well, there's something here and we don't know what it is. One day we'll know, but right now, it's, the Christians in the world, such as myself, such as you, as Doug, those who, but anyway, we'll find out eventually. We'll know what's true. And right now it's, there's so many secrets. Whenever you talk transparency, I'm fully about it. So
there's a lot to unpack there, brother. And we're obviously not going to even try to do that tonight. We just opened up about 10 conversations for future dates.
Yeah.
I will tell you, looking at the chat, it's funny. It was around 2003 or 4. Some of our German relatives who I'd never met before happened to be in San Diego. My family went had breakfast or brunch, whatever, with them down in La Jolla, overlooking the ocean. It was a day I remember quite well. Really nice people, and they were telling me about the Frankenfoods that we have in America, and that's right around the time I was really focusing on organic versus, processed foods. So it kind of made sense to me. But you can't get away from, what we're doing to foods with GMOs and stuff like that. And you said America, we're the experiment. No, what we do is people like Bill Gates, they're doing all the experimentation over in Africa. They're doing that to this day, especially with vaccines and stuff like that. It's ridiculous. I look at the history of Ghana over the last 10 years. I mean, this is a thriving country in Ghana. I joke around and call them the Ghanaians, it's not very nice. Now, Ghana was doing really well. They were exporting energy to their neighbors. They were exporting food to their neighbors. This was a country that was growing. They'd figured a lot of things out. And the United Nations and the World Economic Forum got over there and convinced their politicians that they should, stop using nitrogen, their fertilizer, and go to green energy. And fast forward 10 years, Ghana's broke. They've got energy about once every 3 days. Their people are starving. I mean, this is what these globalists do. So the experimentation is going on in Africa. But if you really want to see it firsthand, just really read up on what's going on in Ghana, because these people have just been brutalized by, these brilliant people from the think tanks in Europe and Brussels and DC, and it's awful the way we treat humanity. And yeah, it breaks my friggin' heart. I wish we could just stop this, but there's a lot to unpack. A lot of questions.
Yeah. All right. Well, I'd say let's wrap this up. But go ahead and plug your Zoom Thursday.
Oh yeah, this Thursday I'm gonna ask Doug to send out the email to everybody on his list. It'll be a live Zoom call. I'm leading the class. I'll talk about some real fun CIA stuff. Doug really wants me to rip on Alexander Hamilton, which I'm more than happy to do at any given moment. But I think I want to do CIA stuff this week. Maybe I'll have time to do both. So hopefully you guys can tune in on that. If you can't make the live class, it'll be 6 p.m. Pacific time. I will have it up on my channel on Rumble and Odyssey, which is war_hamster or war hamster, one word. They both work. And yeah, that's what I'll be doing. That'll be Thursday, and then no class on Tuesday, and Friday I'll probably be hanging out with Andrew again, if the lady hamster allows.
Well, sounds great. Again, it was a pleasure, War Hamster, having you on. And for everyone out there, invite your friends. I mean, let's get this thing going. Get the show getting bigger. I mean, we had 10 max today, and that's fantastic. And we appreciate everybody that joined us, and we would like to have more. So, Tracy, Chris, if y'all are still in here, invite your friends to join this, and it's up to us if we want to change this country. So we need to all get on the same page and be united and like-minded, because if we're not, then we're divided, and that's never good. So, but anyway, all right.
Let me just add in, Andrew, once again, thank you for having me. I'll make myself available as often as you want. I love what you just said about getting us united, not divided. If you have people who don't necessarily agree with you politically, ask them to come on the show, because we're just having a conversation. I'm not a Republican, for the love of God. I never will be. We're just talking the truth, and we need to open up dialogue. And if you have people that disagree with you politically, say, hey, come on the show and ask your questions, and we'll address them. And we try to back it up with facts, and if we don't know it, we'll tell you.
Yeah, 100%. All right. That was the Constitutional Roundtable / the Hamster Corner or Hamster Wheel. I don't know which one you wanted to do, but maybe we can have like a once a month the Hamster Wheel, and the whole show's yours, but it'd have to be on a different day. But again, War Hamster, I appreciate it, and see everybody next Friday, and then also be there Thursday for the Zoom that War Hamster has. So, but anyway, everybody, good night.